Chapter 577. The wind and rain howled. The pale lightning was still flickering in the air. With the church as the center, people in the whole block near Mormons were running and gathering. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, the Vatican had made the largest investment in the dark world in recent years. Nearly 2,000 saint warriors had gathered in Eastern Europe. Under the leadership of Arsis, this was a force that was enough to make the dark world tremble. At this time, this force had been concentrated in Mormons. In the mournful wind and rain, nearly 2,000 people charged in the direction of the church at the same time. The whole church had completely collapsed. The saint warriors stationed in the church suffered heavy casualties. Mellad fled with serious injuries. The Terracotta Army, which had appeared here under the impetus of countless conspiracies, was completely annihilated. The wind and rain were messy and erratic. Above the church, the blazing white flame burned and danced in the wind and rain. It seemed to be the most holy and pure color in the whole night sky. The flame completely wrapped Angel and was getting closer and closer. Her white dress began to deform slightly in the flame, straightened, and finally became hot. The hem of the dress began to burn. This time, Tribulation and Angel were no longer separated by tens of thousands of miles. They were no longer separated by a vast sea of mountains. There was no faith between them that prevented them from holding hands. What stood in front of them was no longer the world that had been cruelly cut off. Instead, there was only Arsis and this ball of fire. Crack, Tribulation moved straight forward. Dense sounds came out of his body, like the sound of bones breaking. He killed the Holy Disarmament Corps, seriously injured Mellad, and destroyed the Terracotta Army. At this time, his whole aura had become completely violent and had climbed to a peak that he had never reached in his life. The sound of bones vibrating became clearer and more intense. No one could see Tribulation's expression. Under the mask, his eyes gradually twisted and became dangerous and ferocious. "You deserve to die." His deep and hoarse voice sounded, like the will of heaven and earth. "I told you, you're all going to die here." Arisis's aura had been rising. The medicine that Mellad had given him had been fully exerted in his body at this time. The domain belonging to the peak of the invincible realm continued to gather around him, and finally turned into a miniature domain with a radius of only a few meters. The domain, which was condensed to the extreme, firmly imprisoned Angel's body in the air. There was a void inside the domain, and only the white flame was constantly burning. Heresy. Arsis grinned hideously. His voice shook at the same time as the thunder in the sky, almost resounding throughout Mormons. "You seduced the Holy Virgin. This is your punishment." A thick palm that symbolized absolute power was raised. Tribulation's figure began to sprint. "Go to hell." With a loud and vast voice, Arisis's palm began to fall. The distance was neither too far nor too short, and it was almost a straight line. In an instant, the domain around Arsis began to shatter. A black shadow appeared beside Angel. Tribulation was sprinting, and so was the black shadow. The black shadow cut directly into the white flame beside Angel and opened his hands. Tribulation took a step forward. It would only take 1 second, no, only half a second for his real body to swap places with the shadow and appear next to Angel. Half a second. Time passed so quickly, and the distance was so short. Buzz. An ear-piercing sound wave suddenly swept across the void. To ordinary people, this sharp sound would only be a fleeting sound. However, in the ears of experts who were absolutely focused in battle, it was a sharp sound. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. It was like a steel needle piercing directly into the ear. The domain around Arsis was completely shattered by Tribulation's sudden advance. But before Tribulation had time to change his position, a new domain had appeared beside him again. This was not a man-made domain, but the power of science and technology. Strictly speaking, it was a magnetic field. The huge magnetic field enveloped tribulation without warning. Because the extremely strange suction came from all directions and acted on tribulation's body in an instant. Puff! Tribulation, whose attack power was the best in the world but whose body was already extremely fragile, suddenly deformed in the huge suction. Countless bones were dislocated in his body, and blood flowed from every part of his body. There was no time to react. As soon as the magnetic field appeared, tribulation was seriously injured. In a very short period of time, all that was left in front of tribulation was the silver disc that suddenly appeared in front of him and was spinning wildly. The silver disc was extremely three-dimensional, less than 1 meter long. As it rotated at an extremely high speed, all the wind and rain around it were repelled by it. The pure magnetic field completely acted on tribulation's body, making his footsteps that were about to step out completely stiff. Anyone who had a certain status in the dark world or knew Zhongzhou State very well would not be unfamiliar with the disc in front of them. This was a luxury that the whole dark world dreamed of, and its status was even second only to murderous weapons. This was the combination of cutting-edge materials and cutting-edge technology. The so-called disc had a name that was famous in the dark world. For Spirit's armor of Zhongzhou State, White Tiger armor. It was different from the silent concealment and camouflage of the Azure Dragon armor. It was also different from the exaggerated penetration and lethality when the Vermilion Bird armor transformed into the string of a rainstorm. The White Tiger armor was also a piece of clothing, but this disc was its real fighting posture. Its greatest function was the magnetic field in front of it, which was absolute confinement and suppression. The White Tiger armor imitated the domain of the invincible realm. For any expert below the invincible realm, it was a nightmare. Tribulation's current combat capability was at the peak of the invincible realm, but his body was not even as good as an ordinary half-step invincible realm expert. His extremely fragile body directly suffered unprecedented damage in the magnetic field that suddenly appeared. Mel Lad. General Shang of 9 Serenities in Zhongzhou State. 2 disciples. His Majesty, who had been hiding in the dark, finally showed his fangs again. Compared to Mel Lad, the magnetic field of the White Tiger armor was the most fatal killing move for tribulation in this state. The magnetic field couldn't kill tribulation, but it slowed down tribulation's body for a moment. Everything in the world often had 2 results in an instant. Tribulation didn't change his position with the black shadow. His body suddenly fell down in a violent and dense crisp sound. Arissa's palm fell on Angel's head. Absolute power, a full blow. Get out. Ah. No. Under the wind and rain, a wail like that of a wild beast that had completely lost its mind suddenly sounded. The majestic and fierce voice of General Abysmal kept ringing for a moment. Situ Wanjia, do you know that Zhongzhou State has? Get out. Tribulation's falling body suddenly stopped. Thick darkness spread out. In an instant, there were black shadows everywhere under the night sky. Countless black shadows filled the magnetic field, and the huge darkness suddenly covered the disk. Bang! The incomparably strong White Tiger armor suddenly shattered. General Abysmal's old and stunned face appeared for a moment. Tribulation's body rushed over. Shang's figure suddenly disappeared on the spot. Countless blood, pieces of flesh, broken bones, hair, and brains fell from the sky. The darkness was whistling. Blazing white fire. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The flames were burning fiercely. Under the huge force, Angel's body suddenly fell. The flames around her suddenly surged, extremely fierce. The custom-made white dress turned into dust. Angel's body began to disappear in the flames, bit by bit. Bright and dim, between life and death. The blazing white flame dimmed for a moment. Angel, with a ferocious knife wound on her face, glanced at tribulation in a trance. Thousands of words, deep feelings, vows of undying love, and unswerving love were so small in the face of death. But angels final will rushed out at the moment of life and death. Their eyes met in the moment of life and death. The surrounding heaven and earth instantly changed color. The darkness began to disappear gradually. The wind and rain stopped. The sun appeared in the polar night, and the whistling cold wind began to warm up. The flat and soft ground extended forward, and at the end was a sea. The sea was vast, and the mountain vaguely appeared in the line between the sky and the sea. The sun of the North Island jumped under the cherry blossom tree, and the cherry blossom petals flew in the air, danced, and fell. A young and inexperienced yet incredibly pure girl walked toward her. "Are you from the North Island?" "Oh, Zhongzhou State. I haven't been there yet. My name is Ariel, from Italos. You like cherry blossoms, too? You can take me with you. Can we really meet again?" "I'm sorry." Countless cherry blossoms fluttered and almost covered the whole sky. The holy girl got closer and closer. Her voice sounded as if it was far away. "Take me away." Tribulation stood quietly in this world. He watched her figure approach him, open her hands, and then gradually melt. With a fragrance, she melted in his arms. The world began to dim. The ocean was roaring. The warmth gradually became cold. Darkness came. The wind and rain gradually subsided. But the cherry blossoms all over the sky were still fluttering. Tribulation raised his head in a daze. In front of him was Arsis, who was exuding monstrous killing intent. Shang's broken body fell. There was a cherry blossom tree beside him. Reality and illusion began to converge at one point. The silver-white flame in the air had begun to dissipate. Angel had disappeared. Only countless fine ashes fell along with the rain, incomparably gentle, incomparably sentimental, as if it was the final farewell. She didn't have time to say anything to him. She didn't say anything. Tribulation's body fell to the ground. He reached out his trembling hand, trying to touch the ashes in the air. The cherry blossoms fell in front of him, covering everything. His trembling eyes and trembling hands gradually became stable. Tribulation watched quietly. Time seemed to pass in a flash, but also like 1,000 years. In the near-eternal haste, the warmth gradually began to disappear. The sky over the cherry blossoms dimmed silently. The last cherry blossom fell in front of him, fell, and disappeared, leaving no trace. Tribulation was motionless, silent as a statue. The world was empty. All the warmth in his heart began to disappear with the falling cherry blossoms, leaving no trace. Far and near, countless saint warriors began to gather and rush over. Tribulation moved his body. The whole world, the whole world, the whole city. There was no more concern in front of him, only the enemy. Tribulation's body trembled. He laughed miserably. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 578. He laughed bitterly without making a sound. Tribulation raised his head. The cold mask covered his face, suppressing all his emotions and holding them in his heart. A faint wetness flowed down the mask. It was extremely cold, with the last hesitation and timidity. The thunder in the sky gradually faded away. The heavy rain that had covered Eastern Europe for several days and nights finally stopped. The world was silent. A depressing and strange atmosphere began to ferment and spread rapidly. Tribulation stood there, as if he had no consciousness. More and more saint warriors rushed into the church, but at the same time, they slowed down their pace. Figures began to gather and surround the church. Layers of saint warriors moved forward quietly, as if they were afraid of waking up something. Arsis had landed on the ground at some point. His body was quietly tense. He looked at Tribulation without speaking or making a move. At this moment, the rising momentum of Tribulation had completely disappeared. He was standing there, but it was like a touch of darkness that could be seen everywhere in the night sky. It was natural, as if he did not exist at all. Arceus's reason wanted him to take action directly, but his inner intuition kept urging him to retreat. The faintly discernible danger quietly surrounded the whole church, and the source of the danger was Tribulation, who was in a daze. The sun and darkness coexisted in the sky. Reality and illusion seemed to have completely merged together. The temperature was so cold. Standing here, Tribulation could clearly smell the fragrance of flowers from North Island. The cherry blossoms fell, and Angel's figure completely disappeared. Tribulation reached out in vain, as if he wanted to catch the floating ash in the air. But the night sky after the rain was clear and cold. The world seemed transparent and so fragile that it made people desperate. There was nothing left. After all, there was nothing left. The past came like a tide and went away with the wind. Tribulation had thought of many possibilities and fantasized about charging many times. The two young men and women, who had met for a short time but had made their souls intertwine, met again. They either loved each other and killed each other with a clear distinction between life and death, or told each other affectionately, or had no choice in Jianghu, or, these fantasies had appeared in Tribulation's mind again and again. However, as time passed year by year, in the long time that could almost make people let go of everything, they had never seen each other again. Until this year, until tonight. There was no clear distinction between life and death, no affection, and no helplessness. The man and woman who missed each other didn't even have time to say a word after many years of separation. Just a glance. Life and death had so cruelly separated them into two different worlds. Tribulation's heart was completely empty, and there was only despair. "I can't take you anymore." Tribulation's voice was erratic and weak. As the night breeze blew past, it seemed to carry the floating ashes with it. Tribulation took off his mask. The mask, which was mixed with many special alloys, turned into dust in his hands. His face was deathly pale and lifeless, carrying countless joys and sorrows. It was extremely miserable. He slowly turned around and looked at Arceus. Why? At this moment, Arceus almost instinctively wanted to turn around and escape. The malice and danger that had always lingered in the night almost turned into a substance and shrouded him. The murderous intent that filled the sky seemed to be emitting a wild laughter filled with the smell of blood. It was like a nightmarish strangeness and coldness that entangled him crazily. Tribulation's eyes were dark. But Arceus saw countless life and death in his eyes. There was sunlight, darkness, cherry blossoms, and the sea in those eyes. In the end, they became dark and empty. Tribulation didn't realize that he had changed. All the changes had long been meaningless. He wanted to become stronger just because he wanted to enter the Holy Land and bring his woman out of the most heavily guarded place in the world. Now he might have been able to do this, but the woman he wanted to bring back had become a handful of ashes in the air. All the reality had become an illusion. Tribulation tilted his head. Tilting his head, he looked at Arceus and said softly, "Speak." His voice was so weak, so weak. Arceus suddenly took a step back and roared, "Heretic, this is what you deserve." He raised his arm and suddenly said, "Kill. Kill him." The saint warriors surrounding Tribulation were getting closer and closer. With Arceus's roar, countless saint warriors suddenly roared and rushed directly to Tribulation. Lightning, raging fire, icicles all over the sky, and cold wind whistled at the same time. Tribulation's figure was distorted. There was no shadow around. His whole person had completely turned into a shadow. Tribulation's arms, legs, and head were all twisting, becoming invisible and intangible. The extremely dense darkness roared with death. There was a bloody light in the darkness. All the raging fire and lightning disappeared completely in an instant. Amidst the extreme silence, death sneered as it covered life. Blood fell like heavy rain. Pieces of flesh and blood flew high into the sky. There was only flesh and blood. The darkness roared for only a moment, but the flesh and broken bones that had been cut off had already fallen in the air. The large pieces of flesh and blood were so dense that people couldn't even tell which part it was. The black shadow passed through the dead crowd and appeared in front of Arsis. Then it came behind him. This black shadow appeared in Aris's consciousness. The sharp pain had suddenly spread all over his body from his back. Blood burst out behind him. An ordinary short knife had cut open his skin and torn a large piece of flesh and blood. Arsis opened his mouth, but before he could roar, his chest had already collapsed under the tremendous force. The roar turned into a spurt of blood, and the extremely blurred and distorted figure dragged his body and smashed it into the ruins on the ground. The whole ground shook with a loud bang, and countless smoke and dust rose. The black shadow kept changing. It didn't dodge, but attacked all the way. Unimaginable power with absolute explosive force fell on Arsis at the same time. Countless saint warriors were still charging forward. At the moment of the loud noise, they subconsciously turned their heads. Before the sound in that direction had died away, Arsis had been hit in another direction. Aris's mind was completely blank. At this moment, he finally confirmed that it was not because Tribulation's body had turned into a ghost and could completely twist. It was because it was fast. Tribulation was too fast. This kind of speed had completely exceeded the reaction speed of the human body in an instant. Arsis wanted to fight back, but countless attacks fell on him, and he couldn't realize what the other party was doing. Because he couldn't see clearly. Countless attacks broke out at the same time. Aris's physical injuries continued to worsen, but he just couldn't see what Tribulation was doing. It wasn't until this moment that Arsis felt panic in his heart. Tribulation was an assassin. To some extent, Rothschild's martial arts were also inclined to this kind of speed and explosive assassin's way. As an old enemy, Arsis was completely an expert in dealing with this kind of opponent. He had fought with Paul of Rothschild, and Paul's combat capability was already at the peak of the invincible realm in King Tong's domain. But Paul in that state was completely inferior to the current Tribulation. He was far inferior. If it was a competition between the so-called top assassins, even if Paul stood in King Tong's domain, it would be difficult for him to hold on for 10 seconds in front of the current Tribulation. This was no longer the peak of the invincible realm. In the whole dark world, no one knew that after Wang Tianzong, it was not deity of the purgatory of heaven capital, Lin Fengting, or Li Tianlan, who was most likely to become the chosen one, who had crossed the threshold of the peak of the invincible realm. It was Tribulation. Half step to the chosen one. The black shadow was howling fiercely. The darkness kept surging. Aris's huge body was completely in Tribulation's belt. He kept moving. He didn't dodge. There was no way to dodge. He was being beaten, and he could only be beaten. Countless forces were surging and attacking his body. At this moment, the speed at which his body was sent flying by Tribulation had almost exceeded the speed at which he burst out with all his strength at his peak. The ruins of the whole church kept shaking. The solid statue, the collapsed hall, the thick pillars, the messy crowd, and the attacks were everywhere. Wherever the black shadow passed, anything that stood in front of him was directly smashed in an instant. Blood sprayed all the way. Aris's consciousness finally made him let out a roar, but the roar was instantly drowned out. It became weak and miserable. The strongest domain of the invincible realm of the church seemed to appear for a moment, and then it was broken in an instant. The crowded crowd of saint warriors was affected by the one-sided battle and instantly turned into blood and minced meat all over the ground. Thick blood fell from the air, with a mass of blurred flesh and blood. One of Aris's eyeballs was dug out by Tribulation and thrown to the ground. But when the scream rang out, Aris's figure had already appeared in another direction. There was no mighty change in the sky and earth when the experts at the peak of the invincible realm fought. There was only an unimaginably fast speed and strength. No one knew if Arsis was fighting, and no one was even sure if he had fought back. The so-called domain, the so-called power, and the so-called number one in close combat in the world were completely crushed in front of the black shadow. Only blood kept flying out, and the screams were continuous. Countless saint warriors crowded uneasily, and finally stopped in the increasingly miserable and frightened screams. Everyone had a blank look on their faces. It seemed that no one had ever thought that Saint War Angel Arcis, who had supported the development of the Vatican for many years, would be treated like this one day. Fighting? This was a complete torture. Arcis finally gave up the intention of fighting back and began to run away with all his strength. He didn't even care about what was in front of him and behind him. He was running like a headless shadow. The black shadow had always been around him. Blood fell from the air. In the scream from high to weak, thick fingers with blood fell to the ground. Hair, eyeballs, teeth, and arms. One by one, the parts were thrown down from the air. The saint warriors in the last row had begun to retreat quietly. Rip, there seemed to be the sound of rags being torn. Arcis's screams had become extremely hoarse. An extremely tall but bloody red figure fell to the ground. As soon as his figure fell to the ground, it began to bounce on the ground. The twisted black shadow gradually became clear. He seemed to be carrying a bag in his hand. All the saint warriors took a step back at the same time. Everyone looked at Tribulation with endless fear in their eyes. The bloody figure fell at Tribulation's feet and kept twitching. No one could tell that it was the once arrogant Saint War Angel. In everyone's eyes, it was just a bloody monster. The real Saint War Angel was being held in Tribulation's hand. Countless drops of blood fell from his hand. It was a piece of human skin. The human skin that belonged to Arcis. Tribulation reached out his hand. The cold wind was like a knife, condensing in his palm. The cold and sharp blade fell on Arcis's body and began to cut off every inch of his flesh and blood little by little. Arcis's screams were extremely hoarse, but his body kept trembling under the severe pain. Tribulation threw the human skin in his hand to the ground. The blade condensed by the cold wind tortured Arcis's body bit by bit in an extremely cruel and cold-blooded way. Tribulation cried out, like a loser who had lost his whole life. He looked at the saint warriors in front of him, trembling and crying. Go to hell. Apex. Chapter 579. The wind and rain that had ravaged Eastern Europe for several days finally stopped. Recce City looked more and more desolate. The night had not yet dissipated. In the dim night, the city without wind and rain was quiet. The cold came down without warning with the disappearance of the wind and rain. There was no spring and autumn in the far north. After the midsummer, above 0 degrees Celsius, it was winter. The banquet in the Manlisai Hotel continued. That night, dozens of wealthy families in Eastern Europe gathered here. Behind the huge transfer of interests represented the changes of the situation. This was an incomparably huge stage. Everyone was dancing on the stage, looking for their own position. But in Li Tianlan's eyes, the whole general trend seemed to be moving away from Recce City with the wind and rain, getting farther and farther away. There seemed to be an invisible force pushing the general trend away from Recce City, which meant that too many future banquets were no longer the core of Eastern Europe. The situation began to shift to a direction that no one could predict. The general trend changed. The invisible force kept pulling, and the general trend was constantly broken. It began to scatter toward the small city in the north near the polar region. The car approached the Manlisai Hotel. In a short time, Li Tianlan's heart had completely calmed down. Tribulation was not in the parade square, but went to Mormons. The news came from Situ Tsangyue, so Li Tianlan could not doubt it at all. It didn't matter why Tribulation went to Mormons and how Situ Tsangyue got the news. What mattered was that Tribulation had gone to that small city. Qin Weibai was also on the way to Mormons. In the plan of Samsara Palace, Mormons was the end of everything. Li Tianlan didn't know what would happen there, but since he had made a decision, all the anxiety and worry began to disappear from his heart. He drove, and there was only cold reason and calmness left in his heart. The car drove past the front door of the Manlisai Hotel. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and dialed Prime Minister Riker's number. His tone was low and flat. "Arrange a private plane. The sooner, the better. I'm going to Mormons." There was silence on the phone. Riker, who obeyed Li Tianlan's words, did not say a word. His rapid breathing came from the phone with anger and embarrassment. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Before he could speak, Riker's voice sounded. "Your Highness, I'm at the defense building. You'd better come in person." Li Tianlan frowned and hung up the phone. Thinking of Riker's subtle tone, he suddenly pressed the button. Throttle. The National Defense Building of Wulan State stood in the center of Reki City. When Li Tianlan arrived, he immediately found that all the signal lights around the National Defense Building had begun to operate. The NEET army had begun to set up defenses around the building intentionally or unintentionally, and the solemn atmosphere was overwhelming. At the main entrance of the National Defense Building, Riker's secretary was waiting. When he saw Li Tianlan coming, he hurriedly saluted and immediately took him upstairs. The interior of the National Defense Building was completely brightly lit. All the staff seemed to have returned to their posts late at night. Everyone was busy. The generals walked past him with serious expressions and discussed the battle plan. The staff officers were in a hurry. More people ran to the elevator with documents in their arms. The tense atmosphere surrounded Li Tianlan clearly, like a dark cloud of war. Li Tianlan frowned, looked at the secretary leading the way in front of him and asked, "What's going on? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." The secretary's face was pale. He said something vaguely. He was distracted and his words were in a mess. Li Tianlan vaguely heard words such as snow country, polar bear, war, and so on. Moreover, his Chinese was too stiff. Even with limited information, Li Tianlan found it extremely difficult to understand. The two quickly approached the elevator closest to the main entrance. Several staff officers saw Li Tianlan and gave way without hesitation. The elevator went all the way up and finally stopped outside the conference room on the 7th floor. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, walked out of the elevator, and directly pushed open the door of the conference room. The conference room was already crowded. Prime Minister Riker was standing at the front of the conference room, staring at the screen in front of him in silence. Several high-level officials of Wulan State, Tostal, the current patriarch of Rekvia, Qin Dongchao, the patriarch of the Qin clan, General of Nine Heavens of Zhongzhou State, Li Wangsheng, Lin Yuxian, and Dongqing Rushi, who was a little confused and weak, all gathered in the conference room. Seeing Li Tianlan come in, everyone stood up. Before Li Tianlan could speak, Riker, who had been staring at the screen, turned around and said in a hoarse voice, "Your Highness, the real war has come." Li Tianlan, who had been mentally prepared, walked to the main seat and sat down. He said calmly, "What's the specific situation?" Riker glanced at Tostal. Tostal nodded, got up, and said, "A few hours ago, Tyrant, the former leader of the Polar Ground Alliance, appeared in the palace of Snow Country. In less than an hour, Snow Country began to declare war on all the dark forces in Eastern Europe. Tyrant was appointed as the chief marshal of the military of Snow Country. The branches of the Arctic Army have wiped out 6 small and medium-sized dark forces in the process of mobilization. At the same time, Snow Country blocked all airspace. Now look at their movements, whether it is the Arctic Army or the Bear Army, their destination is Mormons. Mormons. It was Mormons again. It was Mormons. Li Tianlan's heart was pounding. He nodded expressionlessly and said, "Go on." As soon as Tyrant's appointment was confirmed, Snow Country had held a temporary war conference among Eastern European countries. In the shortest time, more than 9 countries had made it clear that they were willing to advance and retreat with Snow Country to protect Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan suddenly sneered. Whose Eastern Europe is Eastern Europe? There were many countries in Eastern Europe, but in the capitalist world, everything belonged to capital, not people. And capital belonged to the wealthy families. Whose Eastern Europe was Eastern Europe? This is the root cause of the war. Qin Dongchao said slowly. He stood up, walked to the screen, and reached out to tap the screen. The map of Eastern Europe on the screen lit up, and the territories of each country appeared clearly in front of everyone. The map was completely red, as if the color of blood was flashing gently, with the smell of death. Your Highness, as you can see, now almost all of Eastern Europe is a battlefield. Many countries have stood in the camp of Snow Country and even attacked their own wealthy families. The wealthy families attending the banquet here tonight are the first targets of the camp of Snow Country. Now these wealthy families are fighting back with all their might, and countless small and medium-sized forces that have not yet withdrawn from Eastern Europe are involved. As we speak, the land of Eastern Europe, every country, and even every city is bleeding. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and stood up. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He was expressionless. Reki City will not stand in the camp of Snow Country. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe are still stable for the time being. As for the Qin clan, Bayou State can also stabilize the situation, but it can only stabilize the situation. 9 countries have expressed that they are in the camp of Snow Country. As for now, no one can say for sure if there will be more. But they have formed a military alliance in the fastest time and blocked the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. 40 minutes ago, 2 cruise planes of Wulan State were shot down over Kolin City. It is no exaggeration to say that now the planes of Wulan State and even the 5 countries in Eastern Europe can't fly out of the airspace of the 5 countries at all. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He glanced around the conference room and suddenly asked, "The key point is in Mormons?" "Yes, I have contacted the intelligence system of the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace. Although there is no definite evidence, it is almost certain that Snow Country has had in-depth cooperation with the Vatican. Now that Tyrant has returned, once he leads the Polar Ground Army to cooperate with the Holy Disarmament Corps led by Arcis of the Vatican, they can take over the Polar Ground Alliance again in the shortest time and gather most of the forces of the Polar Ground Alliance. At that time, they will have an army and a master. In terms of top combat power, they will have Tyrant and Arcis. This kind of strong force is enough for them to destroy all the dark forces in Snow Country. Lin Yoxian's tone was calm. Li Tianlan looked at the map in front of him with cold eyes. Wipe out the interior of Snow Country and then march into Im? He asked suddenly. Dongqing Rushi frowned slightly and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Li Wangsheng had already said directly, if these 2 forces cooperate, the Arctic Ocean Command can't stop them. Li Tianlan nodded. As soon as Im was broken, all 5 countries in Eastern Europe would be exposed to the fangs of Snow Country and the Vatican. If Snow Country and the Vatican were allowed to enter the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, all the situations created by Zhongzhou State here would collapse. The signed agreements and huge profits would also turn into nothingness. Now all the wealthy families in Reki City would end up ruined. The influence of Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe would completely disappear, and this land would be completely ruled by Snow Country. The most important thing was that this plan, which sounded crazy, was completely possible to succeed. After all, Snow Country was also one of the dominant countries in the world. As one of the most powerful superpowers in the world with the combination of elite troops, powerful armaments, a large number of masters and invincible realm experts, it was enough to overturn all situations. No one had expected that Snow Country, which had been extremely silent in the chaos of Eastern Europe, would suddenly launch a counterattack so fierce and abrupt. The good situation had become precarious under Snow Country's attack. Snow country. Mormons, the Vatican, Li Tianlan muttered to himself and suddenly said, "Prepare the car. Let's go to Mormons." With the airspace blocked, the only way to go to Mormons was to drive. The ground was full of battlefields at this time. Lin Yuxian was stunned. Dongqing Rushi opened her mouth. Li Wangsheng and Yi looked at each other. Everyone had helplessness and bitter smiles on their faces. It was easy to find a car. But now that the Snowdance Corps was imprisoned by Wang Tianzong, where could they find people? Everyone was looking at Li Tianlan. In the face of the final counterattack and malice of all of Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan looked extremely calm and said lightly, "When has Zhongzhou state ever been afraid?" End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 580. In any war of any scale, having no one available was always the most awkward problem. The Snowdance Corps was full of experts. Li Tianlan originally had elite soldiers everywhere. But when the entire Snowdance Corps was frozen by Wang Tianzong's sword, Li Tianlan's biggest trump card was suddenly abolished. He was still a marshal, but he had lost his own troops. It was a distance of thousands of miles from Reki City to Mormons, and he had to pass through the borders of 6 countries along the way. When the whole of Eastern Europe became a battlefield, God knew how many enemies Li Tianlan would encounter. When there was no one available, he could not go there alone. Li Tianlan knocked on the table and glanced at Li Wangsheng. Li Wangsheng did not hesitate in the slightest. The Xuanwu of today was the lieutenant general of the 9 states. His position had become increasingly stable in recent years, but in his heart, the young master was still the young master. The Black Tortoise Terracotta Army is willing to follow young master. Li Wangsheng smiled calmly. "Let's kill them together." Li Tianlan nodded. Before he could speak, another voice rang out, "The Vermilion Bird team is willing to fight with the marshal." Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. Yi, codenamed Vermilion Bird, nodded slightly to Li Tianlan and said nothing more. "Thank you, General." Li Tianlan said seriously and sincerely. The Terracotta Army had a transcendent status in Zhongzhou State and did not belong to the Snowdance Corps. Although Yi was a general, his code name was Jiutian, so his status was not lower than that of a marshal. Under any circumstances, Li Tianlan could not directly give orders to Yi. Because of this, Yi stood up at this time. Such support was crucial. "You're welcome, Marshal." Yi shook his head. "Also, I can represent Azure Dragon here. The Azure Dragon team will follow us." Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat. Only then did he realize that he had overlooked this figure that he should not have ignored in any case. He narrowed his eyes and asked calmly, "Where is General Gongsun?" Yi glanced at him. His eyes were a little strange, but his answer was extremely calm, "Mormons." Li Tianlan's heart suddenly shook. The atmosphere in the conference room suddenly became a little subtle. The appearance of the tyrant, the movement of the Polar Bear Army, the war in Eastern Europe. After the storm, the core of the entire Eastern Europe was converging toward Mormons. Now that Gongsun Qi was already in Mormons, did it mean, to some extent, that Zhongzhou State was not completely passive in this sudden chaos? "Marshal, there's something you said just now that I deeply agree with." Yi's tone was calm and steady. "The current situation is indeed terrible and sudden. But have we, Zhongzhou State, ever been afraid?" Li Tianlan suddenly clenched his fists and his eyes fell directly on Qin Dongchao. Before he could speak, Qin Dongchao said directly, "Time is short, and the number of people that the Qin clan can mobilize is limited. Your Highness, now the Qin clan can gather about 300 elites in Reki City. These people are now outside the city and can set off with your Highness at any time." Li Tianlan nodded. Beside Qin Dongchao, Lin Yuxian raised his hand with a wry smile. "Tianlan, I can go with you, but only by myself. Do you understand?" Li Tianlan was confused. According to my father, I shouldn't have been able to get close to Mormons. But my legs are with me, and he is not there. Of course, I can go. But now I can't do anything to the Lin clan. To some extent, I am no longer the heir of the Lin clan for the time being, and I have no right to mobilize the resources of the Lin clan. This is the will of the new patriarch. He hesitated and still did not tell Li Tianlan who the new patriarch of the Lin clan was. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. She revealed her will. She doesn't want you to go to Mormons. Li Tianlan looked at Lin Fengting and was silent for a long time. It was not until this moment that he vaguely understood something. Why did the gradually frozen relationship between the Qin clan and the Lin clan become harmonious? Why did the Qin clan spare no effort to help? He remembered several conversations with Qin Shilai. It was not until the news that the Lin clan had a new patriarch was confirmed by Lin Yuxian that he was thoughtful. The Samsara Palace had a close relationship with the Qin clan, and now it had cooperation with the Lin clan. Did the so-called new patriarch of the Lin clan come from the Samsara Palace? It was self-evident who was qualified to be the patriarch of the Lin clan in the Samsara Palace and did not want him to go to Mormons. He looked at Qin Dongchao and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Is it her?" Qin Dongchao subconsciously avoided Li Tianlan's gaze. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and smiled. "I have to go," he whispered, as if he was muttering to himself, but the determination between the lines was so strong. The final battle was in Mormons. The Vatican, Snow Country, the Polar Ground Alliance. The Samsara Palace, the Lin clan. Even the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Terracotta Army, and even the Wang family of Beihai. Now they were all gathering in that direction. Li Tianlan was not sure what would happen there. But now Wang Tianzong was in Reki City. Once Tyrant and Arsis joined forces, the endless elites of Snow Country and fanatics would merge into one. Whether it was the Samsara Palace, the Lin clan, or the Purgatory of Heaven capital, they would all be in great trouble. Now the huge army swept across the whole of Eastern Europe, and the real torrent was gathering in Mormons. Once Tyrant and the Vatican broke through Mormons, the core of Zhongzhou state's interests in Eastern Europe, would be the first to bear the brunt, followed by the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. That was the real general trend, and it was unstoppable. Because their army was endless. The general trend was advantageous. Going to the end was also a dead end. Li Tianlan and even all the interests of Zhongzhou state in Eastern Europe were facing an unprecedented threat. This was the most violent counterattack of Snow Country. There was only one way in front of him. He had to fight and extinguish all the forces of Snow Country, or he would be attacked by Snow Country and everything on his side would be extinguished by Snow Country. This way was so clear. How could Li Tianlan not go? Everything he had in Eastern Europe. The people he cared about were in Mormons. The Lin clan was cooperating with the Samsara Palace. The Lin clan stood aloof from the world. The master of Samsara Palace said that she wanted to make an end with the Wang family of Beihai, but the entire Samsara Palace was already in a state of half-collapse. Even if all this was completely over, the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace would not get anything. But they were fighting desperately. For what? Or rather, for whom? Li Tianlan's brain suddenly became dizzy. As the world spun, his body swayed and he held the table in front of him. The great change was sudden. Everyone in the conference room stood up abruptly. Dongqing Rushi appeared beside Li Tianlan immediately and frowned. "What's wrong?" "It's okay." Li Tianlan waved his hand. He was silent for a while, and then he laughed in a self-deprecating way. The great pain spread from his body with a clear feeling of tearing. His heart kept twitching. The emptiness of losing everything, accompanied by fear, occupied his consciousness. His face was a little pale. Li Tianlan finally realized what he had ignored, or what those emotions were that had been erased by an invisible force. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. That was reluctance. It was unforgettable reluctance. Li Tianlan, who had always felt that he was very sober, realized that he had indifferently let Qin Weibai and the master of Samsara Palace go to Mormons. When he knew that it was about to become the place of the final battle, he asked Qin Weibai and the master of Samsara Palace to go to Mormons. There was worry and uneasiness in his heart, but this emotion seemed so insignificant in his calm heart. It turned out that it was not insignificant, but that he had subconsciously ignored it. Hypnosis. Li Tianlan clenched his fists. His consciousness was perfect now, and it was impossible for him to be hypnotized. The only explanation was that the hypnosis this time, whether it was Qin Weibai or the master of Samsara Palace, could not have erased some of his emotions in the past few days. Not even in the past few years. The seed that had been planted in his spiritual world 3 years ago had only begun to sprout today, quietly and without a sound. Li Tianlan's body trembled slightly, and he slowly straightened his body. All the weakness and fear completely disappeared in his heart. In an instant, the awe-inspiring sword intent began to surge in the conference room. Li Tianlan stood up and walked to the screen. The map of Eastern Europe was enlarged in front of him. He reached out and drew a line on the screen. Starting from Reki City, he rushed out of Wulan State, out of Ras State, out of Oga State, through Im, all the way to the Longji border, through the hinterland of the Eisen Federation, into Snow Country, and straight to Mormons. This meant a journey of thousands of miles in reality. At this time, no one knew how many war zones and battlefields there were. Li Tianlan drew it little by little, and it was a straight line. At all costs. In the power and sword intent that filled the conference room, everyone felt crazy. Your Highness, Snow Country is not to be trifled with. Rieker stood up and said seriously. Snow Country was not to be trifled with. This was an international consensus. The country with the largest territory in the world would rather have its own economic order close to collapse in order to maintain its extremely powerful military strength. To a certain extent, it could even be said to be a model of militarism. Now that Snow Country had declared war on all the dark forces, it was enough to prove their strength. This was no longer a conflict in the dark world. This was a war. And Snow Country was one of the countries with the strongest war power and war potential in the world. I know. Li Tianlan looked at the map in front of him. Everyone knows that Snow Country is not to be trifled with. But after so many years, it seems that many people have forgotten that the Li family is not to be trifled with. He stared deeply at the map of Eastern Europe in front of him, his eyes sharp and ferocious. Eastern Europe. This land, which had been trampled by the Li family in the past, seemed to have forgotten the sharpness of the Li family and the awe they should have. He stared at the vast territory of Snow Country, and his whole mind had flown to Mormons. His real reluctance and future were there. The Snowdance Corps was imprisoned by a sword. So he was no longer a marshal. But Li Tianlan was still Li Tianlan. Today, he had Li Wangsheng, Lin Yuxian, Yi, and the elites of the Qin clan by his side. Even if he had nothing by his side and was alone, he still had confidence in himself. He dared to fight his way through alone. In troubled times, Zhongzhou State was not afraid. When had the Li family ever been afraid of anything? He slowly turned around and said calmly, "Let's go." End of this chapter, bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 581. It was afternoon in Yuzhou when they received the battle report from Eastern Europe. The atmosphere in the Bai family's manor was harmonious. Bai Qingqian came to Yuzhou from Guangdong to attend a meeting held by the cabinet, while Dongqing Chuqi went to Yuzhou to talk about a project. Dongqing Wudi did not go to the army headquarters. Instead, he came to the Bai family's manor with Bai Qingzhao, the deputy secretary general of the army headquarters. Dongqing Hanguang had left Linpen, but he did not return to Zhongyuan. Instead, he was a guest in the Bai family. This was a rare scene over the years. The giant group had always been a little loose. In recent years, as the leaders of the giant group, although the Bai family and the Dongqing clan could still maintain the same general direction, the cracks in private had become more and more obvious. It was all mediated by the Zhou family. The root cause of the gradual alienation of the two families was nothing more than the worsening relationship between Bai Qingqian and Dongqing Wudi. But recently, the relationship between Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian had gradually warmed up. In addition, Dongqing Wudi held a post in Yuzhou. The relationship between the two families began to gradually ease, and they visited each other more frequently. Dongqing Qiuqi and her mother were making dumplings in the kitchen. In the living room, Bai Zhanfang, Bai Qingzhao, Dongqing Hanguang, and Dongqing Wudi were chatting. All four of them were big shots who were qualified to see the top secrets of Zhongzhou state. The topic also revolved around Eastern Europe, so the atmosphere of the conversation was as serious as a meeting of the army headquarters. Near dinner time, Bai Zhanfang took the initiative to mention the engagement between Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi. After the war, the news that Li Tianlan did not take care of the Snowdance Corps but took Dongqing Rushi to get a room had now spread widely among the upper class of Zhongzhou state. Countless people reprimanded it as absurd. But specifically, inside the Dongqing clan, everyone was smiling, and the engagement had begun to be put on the agenda. Recently, there had been a lot of internal turmoil in the Dongqing clan. The fact that Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi were together could be said to be the only good news, so Dongqing Wudi discussed it with great interest. On impulse, he even decided to marry Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi as soon as they came back from Eastern Europe. In the happy atmosphere, Lieutenant General Cheng Huaining, commander of the Arctic Ocean Command, directly called Dongqing Wudi's cell phone. Without any courtesy, the first sentence made the smile on Dongqing Wudi's face disappear. "Marshal, the war has broken out." Countless gunshots rang from the phone. The roar of explosions was continuous, and Cheng Huaining's voice was intermittent. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes. At this moment, he, who had been smiling, had become a little strange to everyone, including Dongqing Hanguang. He slowly stood up and looked out the window. It was already dusk outside the window. The afterglow of the setting sun illuminated the sky, and the white clouds in the sky seemed to be burning. The setting sun was like blood. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, "Where are you?" "I'm Eastern Europe, battlefield." The signal seemed to be jammed, and intermittent messages kept coming. "Arctic Ocean, 6 bases, attack. Snow Country. His Highness Tianlan. Snowdance Corps is imprisoned." Dongqing Wudi listened quietly and tried to distinguish the information. Cheng Huaining didn't say a word of nonsense, but all the information was incomplete. "You don't have enough men?" "The command is enough." "Your Highness Tianlan, there's no one." The rumbling became more and more obvious. Dongqing Wudi held the phone and was silent for a long time. If the Arctic Ocean Command had enough manpower, Tianlan didn't have anyone available? What did it mean that the Snowdance Corps was imprisoned? The situation in Reki City had been settled. How could the war have anything to do with Snow Country? Cheng Huaining's call was cut off. The phone rang again. Dongqing Wudi glanced at the phone and immediately connected it. "Mr. President." "Wudi, something happened in Eastern Europe." Li Huaqing's voice was low. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." Although he still sounded calm, the anger in his tone was extremely obvious. Before Dongqing Wudi could speak, he had already said directly, "The Heavenly Sword has imprisoned the entire Snowdance Corps in the parade square. Tyrant has returned and officially joined Snow Country. Now there are battlefields everywhere in Eastern Europe. Snow Country mobilized nearly hundreds of thousands of troops overnight. The most elite polar bear was led by Tyrant to Mormons, and other troops began to expel all hostile forces. Tianlan set off for Mormons half an hour ago. There were less than 500 people around him. Snap! The special mobile phone was crushed by Dongqing Wudi in an instant. Dongqing Wudi's expressionless face was already livid. No one could have imagined that Eastern Europe, which had been settled, would be in such chaos overnight. The Arctic Ocean Command was under attack. The Polar Bear Army went straight to Mormons. Hundreds of thousands of troops of Snow Country wreaked havoc in Eastern Europe, and there was smoke everywhere. Under such circumstances, would Li Tianlan fight to Mormons with only a few hundred people? But when the Snowdance Corps was frozen, it was not bad for Li Tianlan to gather hundreds of people. The Arctic Ocean Command had no time to care about other things. Even if Cheng Huining still had the strength to spare, he did not dare to support Li Tianlan at this time. It was not that he could not, but that he did not dare. After all, he was parachuted in and did not have a good control over the more than 100,000 troops of the Arctic Ocean Command. More than a month could not even let him sort out the internal relations. In his view, the Arctic Ocean Command could be said to be the direct line of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong froze the Snowdance Corps with a sword. At this time, how could Cheng Huining dare to transfer the military power of the Arctic Ocean Command to Li Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath. His unusual movements had attracted everyone's attention. The living room became solemn. Finally, Dongqing Wudi held out his hand to Bai Qingzhao. Mobile phone. Bai Qingzhao handed the mobile phone to Dongqing Wudi and said, "What's the matter?" Dongqing Wudi lowered his head and dialed Li Huaqing's phone again. He said calmly, "Prepare a military plane to Liaodong. In addition, inform the 4 headquarters to hold a meeting. Send the order for all the Black Army of the Border Control Corps to be ready for battle." He looked at his watch and said lightly, "In 3 hours, we will march into Snow Country." Dongqing Hanguang suddenly stood up. "Wudi, what's going on? There are changes in Eastern Europe." Dongqing Wudi rubbed his temples. "I don't know a lot of things for the time being, but Tyrant returned and Snow Country began to be restless. Now the whole of Eastern Europe has become a battlefield. The specific news should come back soon. Dad, time is running out. I'll go to the headquarters of the Black Dragon Army first." He paused and continued, "Don't worry, Zhongzhou State is fine, and so is Tianlan. Nothing will happen." Snow Country? Dongqing Hanguang's eyes were a little cold. Dongqing Wudi suddenly sneered. "It's no big deal. The Arctic Army and the Bear Army? 10 years ago, 30,000 elites were chased by 3,000 people of my Thunderbolt battalion for nearly 600 miles and even lost their flag? How can they be called elites?" Boundless murderous aura surged out of him. Dongqing Wudi's eyes turned blood red. He got up and walked out of the door, saying calmly, "I'm going to destroy Snow Country." Reki City, Parade Square. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were still motionless. In front of Li Huaqing, Wang Tianzong, who was condensed by sword energy, had quietly disappeared. Li Huaqing's expression gradually became cold. As soon as the news of the chaos in Eastern Europe reached his ears, he did not rush to the defense building of Wulan State, because he knew it was meaningless. In fact, he came to Wulan State as a symbol, and the real influential person was Li Tianlan. So Li Huaqing stayed here, hoping to influence Wang Tian. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Indulgence. But now it seemed that all his efforts had completely failed. Is the current situation also in your plan? Li Huaqing asked in a cold tone through the huge and vague sword intent. The next second, Wang Tianzong's voice sounded from afar, extremely clear. "Yes. What on earth do you want?" Li Huaqing frowned. "I've already said it." Wang Tianzong's voice was quiet, without any fluctuation. "I want the whole of Eastern Europe." Li Huaqing sneered. Can you get it? Is the current situation in your plan? Tianzong, you're too confident. No one can control everything. In such a situation, even if you control Tyrant and even the president of Snow Country, what can you do? Snow Country has hundreds of thousands of troops, and other countries have countless troops. They are fighting everywhere. No one has a way to retreat. Who else can you control? Who is willing to listen to you? Don't worry. Wang Tianzong said blandly, after today, everything should be over. You can't win. Li Huaqing roared, how many people can the Wang family of Beihai have? Do you want to move the entire Beihai Corps to Eastern Europe? Not only can you not take down Eastern Europe, but you may even ruin everything in front of you. Tianzong, it's still not too late. The 10,000 people in front of you still have a chance to reverse the situation. They can only stay here. Wang Tianzong's voice was firm and indifferent. President, these are the most elite troops of Zhongzhou State. They can participate in any battlefield, but they shouldn't die in vain in this situation tonight. I'm responsible for Zhongzhou State by keeping them here. He paused and continued, as for the Wang family of Beihai. The main reason why the Wang family of Beihai has always been able to dominate the dark world is not how many people we have, but because we have swords. Vaguely, he laughed. My sword is coming. I can feel it. You have swords, Li Huaqing said in an absurd tone. If you have swords, can you compete with the whole of Snow Country and even the whole of Eastern Europe? Wang Tianzong did not answer this question. She was silent for a while and calmly said, Here, Snow Country is not the only country that will declare war. Almost at the same time as Wang Tianzong said this. With Snow Country as the center, the same news spread to all corners of Eastern Europe almost at the same time through countless channels. The Wang family of Beihai, which had been operating in Eastern Europe for many years, almost used all its trump cards at once. Countless news spread quickly. Within Snow Country, a large number of killings started without warning. It belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. After a long silence, the will belonging to the Sword Emperor began to wreak havoc throughout Eastern Europe unscrupulously. Everyone received the news. That was the official notice belonging to the Wang family of Beihai. If you want to take Eastern Europe, every country and city in Eastern Europe, mountains, rivers, grass, trees, senior officials, and people, will be under the sword of Beihai. In the palace of Snow Country. The president of Snow Country, who had just finished the meeting, looked at the notice that appeared silently on his desk and was silent for a long time. A general, who was ready to lead the army to set off after the tyrant, looked angry and ferocious. Mr. President, what is this? The president of Snow Country was silent. After a long time, he said faintly, Isn't it obvious? This is a notice. A notice was the weakest thing, but it was also the most powerful thing. A country and a city, mountains, rivers, grass, trees, senior officials, and people. They were all under the sword of Beihai. There was no threat, no advice. This notice was placed here, like the sharpest sword, suppressing all of Eastern Europe. Under the sword, there were always only two choices. Surrender. Or death. End of this chapter, bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 582. The darkest part of the polar night was also the time when the killing was the fiercest. The entire Mormons had completely turned into hell. The endless murderous intent pushed blood and death to every corner of the city. The almost crazy killing intent continued to condense. It seemed to have undergone a qualitative change, as if it had condensed the heaven and earth. When the thick killing intent of the night swept over the castle, Deity woke up from his meditation and looked out of the window. It was still night outside the window. In the darkness of the night, the chaotic screams seemed to have lost their minds. The mournful cries of people in the midst of true despair brought with them an unreal sense of fear. The killing intent that almost tore the heaven and earth flashed away. Countless screams stopped and then disappeared completely. The surroundings were quiet for a moment. Not far away, chaotic explosions sounded. The roaring and messy gunshots lingered in the whole city, as if it were the end of the world. Deity's eyes gradually became clear. There seemed to be a setting sun in his calm eyes, which was extremely real. Deity's body moved, and the aura that had been restrained to the extreme began to recover slowly. An extremely loud heartbeat suddenly sounded around the castle. Even though it was already very far away, the killing intent in the distance still paused slightly, and then it became more and more frenzied. Deity looked into the distance and felt the killing intent. His eyes were solemn and he was silent. That aura was so violent. He had never seen such a strong killing intent in his life. It was crazy, frenzied, cold-blooded, and brutal, with a strong tendency to self-destruct. The final battle was coming. When did such a person appear in Mormons? Or, when did such a person appear in the dark world? Deity's eyes became bright. His body was trembling, and he seemed more and more real. A figure appeared in front of the door and paused. Deity turned his head slightly. "Come in." The handsome and almost demonic figure walked in and bowed slightly. "Your Highness." Deity narrowed his eyes and seemed to be a little surprised. Then he waved his hand. "Sit down. When did you come back?" It was not Daybreak who came in. It was Dawn, who had rarely appeared around Deity since he came to Eastern Europe. "I just arrived." It seemed that because he was nervous, there was no expression on Dawn's face. What he wanted to report had nothing to do with tonight, but the sudden news was still too shocking. So as soon as he sat down, he couldn't wait to say, "Your Highness, Arsis has died." This news was earth-shattering to anyone. Deity's hand that was pouring the tea suddenly trembled, and the warm water splashed out. With an unconcealable strangeness, he asked, "You mean Arsis?" Dawn smiled bitterly. When he first received the news, he also thought that he had misheard, but the battle happened in Mormons. Under special circumstances, it was extremely easy for them to obtain evidence. The evidence was conclusive. Even if this news was unbelievable, it was the truth. God was silent for a long time. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, his voice slowly rang out, "How is the Pope?" He did not ask who had done it. This question was important, but not as important as the Pope's condition. Aries. The Pope. One of the two pillars that supported the Vatican to stand at the peak of the world had completely collapsed. What would happen to the other one was something that all the bigwigs in the dark world were concerned about. The Pope is missing. In fact, the one outside should be chasing after the Pope. There was excitement and fear in Dawn's voice. Nearly 3,000 saint warriors, the most elite 3,000 saint warriors of the Vatican, are now less than 500. The dead, his voice was a little trembling. None of the corpses are intact. Deity quietly drank a cup of tea. That little guy, he recalled, and seemed to have a lot to say. Finally, he shook his head. Angel is dead. He was not asking, but affirming. Your Highness, do you know who the other party is? Dawn was a little curious. Of course. Deity's tone seemed to be a bit complicated. The little guy who killed Arsis tonight was introduced to martial arts by me. I was very optimistic about him at the beginning. I even valued him more than I did you and Daybreak. He had the chance to join us, but young people. Hey. He shook his head in self-mockery and muttered to himself, when the Vatican wanted to establish the East Asia Diocese, Holy Virgin Angel went to East Island to avoid the internal disputes of the Vatican. I arranged for her to meet tribulation, but the subsequent development was beyond my expectation. They developed too slowly and too fast. I made a lot of preparations, but before I had time to take action, he went to the old man. If not, today would probably be a different ending. Dawn looked at Deity and was stunned for a long time. Then he shook his head with a wry smile. I didn't expect it, I really didn't expect it. You thought I completely gave up Psi City? Deity looked at Dawn with a smile, and his eyes were a little melancholy. At this moment, no one knew if he thought of the man in white who stood on the top of Mount Taibai all year round. I never gave up, but I really couldn't get it. Over the years, I've been trying to get Psi City back, but I fought with the old man several times, and the whole Psi City was pulled over by him little by little. There's no way, really no way. There's still a chance. Dawn hesitated. Her Highness Hidden God is now in Eastern Europe. After such a long time, she may have noticed your identity. Why not? Deity slowly poured himself a cup of tea. He thought about it seriously for a long time, and then said blandly, I don't dare. Dawn froze for a moment. Deity did not explain the reason. He just thought of the meeting with the old man in Lin, and before he came to Eastern Europe. He left Phoenix with the old man. When he left, the old man whom he wanted to live forever in the first half of his life and hoped to die 1,000 times in the second half of his life said, you will fall to the ground. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. One place. Twice. The first time he fell, he was almost doomed. He fell in the hands of a woman. The same place, twice, he was not sure if it was Situ Tsangyue. But ambitious people were suspicious. Deity did not dare to move. In the end, he could only stay still. He got up, walked to the window, and looked at the distant sky. The killing intent in the distant sky continued to condense, tearing heaven and earth. The wind and rain had stopped. Some starlight appeared in the clear night. The starlight gradually lit up, and there were more and more. The killing intent became more and more intense and kept rising, as if it wanted to transform again. This was the killing intent and aura belonging to the half-step chosen one. But this killing intent seemed to have no end. It was constantly rising, almost crazily. It's close to the real supreme. Deity whispered to himself, amazing talent. Unfortunately, it's the end of the road. He held the teacup and looked down at the tea in the cup. The tea was rippling. Deity's voice was complicated and lost. So am I. This time, it's really the end of the road. Your Highness, Dawn felt that Deity's aura had become a little different from the past and hesitated a little. Deity waved his hand with flagging interest. He looked at Dawn and asked, how's the thing I asked you to investigate? Dawn was stunned, and his expression suddenly became serious. He and Daybreak followed Deity to Eastern Europe. Before the final battle, Dawn had another task. His task was very difficult, but in the chaos, it was not impossible. What he needed to do was to determine the whereabouts of people. But what he needed to determine was the whereabouts of experts of the invincible realm. It was not a certain expert of the invincible realm. It was the whereabouts of all the experts of the invincible realm in the Dark World more than 3 years ago. To be exact, it was the whereabouts of every expert of the invincible realm in the Dark World on the days of the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago. Dawn naturally knew why, so he investigated very carefully. More than 3 years ago, a few days before the final battle of Heaven Capital, a young man named Huawu, who had never appeared in the eyes of any force in the Dark World, died. He was the son of Deity. For more than 3 years, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, headed by Dawn, had been investigating this matter carefully, looking for any clues. Huawu was just a teenager at that time, but Deity's martial arts had made great breakthroughs. The immortality seal could break the shackles of martial arts. At that time, the teenager, who was only 17 or 18 years old, had the strength of the thunder-shocking realm. His martial arts were extremely stable, and he had reached the limit of every realm. Dawn knew how terrifying Huawu was at that time. Although Huawu was not at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, he was no less than most of the half-step invincible realm experts. When they checked the scene afterward, all the signs showed that there seemed to be no power of the invincible realm involved in that battle. But the problem was that if there was no power of the invincible realm, the other party could not kill Huawu at all. If Huawu wanted to run, no one could stop him unless he was in the invincible realm. An absolute super genius died in East Island, which rose in the purgatory of heaven capital. Deity had endured the anger in his heart for 3 years. Huawu definitely died under the power of an invincible realm expert. Now the chaos in East Island broke out. After the day of death and the trial day, all the invincible realm experts suffered heavy casualties, and all the superpowers were in chaos. Dawn found an opportunity and began to carefully investigate the whereabouts of every invincible realm expert from more than 3 years ago until today. Dawn was a little hesitant. Deity raised his eyelids. Speak. More than 3 years ago, during the final battle of Heaven Capital, Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, Jiang Qianyan, Chaos, Tianhai Wuji, and Lusheng Zhangxuan were all in Huoding. Dawn hesitated. According to my investigation, Tyrant was in Eastern Europe at that time, Jiang Qiansong did not leave South America, Charlemagne was active in Star State, and he seemed to be discussing cooperation with Cass Rotter. Arsis went to the border of Zhongzhou State, and King Tong and Paul were in the headquarters in England. In the extremely quiet night, Dawn's voice calmly told the whereabouts of the invincible realm experts more than 3 years ago. The divine list, the holy list. Most of the dozens of invincible realm experts now had accurate information. At some point, Dawn stopped. Deity drank tea silently and said blandly, "There are 2 more people. We can't confirm the whereabouts of these 2 people at present." Dawn said with a bitter smile, "One is the master of Samsara Palace. She didn't take action in Huoding at that time. During that time, no one could determine her whereabouts. As for the other person," he hesitated and said cautiously, "it's Li Shi, the wife of the governor of Kunlun City. She was in East Island at that time, but we don't know where she was. At present, Li Shi is the most suspicious." Deity was motionless, as if he had turned into a statue. The master of Samsara Palace. Li Shi. These were the 2 most suspicious people at present. In the silence, Deity lit a cigarette and took a deep breath. "Do you know Saint?" he asked suddenly. "Saint of Samsara Palace?" Dawn was a little curious. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, Saint stayed in East Island and brought Li Tianlan, who was shot in the heart, back to Zhongzhou State. From then on, his identity was no longer a secret in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Wei Kunlun of Mount Shu. "It's him." Deity said quietly, "In recent days, I suddenly thought of something related to Saint." Dawn was confused. She didn't know why God was talking about the saints at this time. Saint was one of the strongest superiors of the half-step invincible realm in the Dark World, which was the traditional combat capability of the invincible realm. But no matter what happened now, at least 3 years ago, Saint didn't really break through the invincible realm. Even if Huawu couldn't defeat Saint, he could at least escape. More than 3 years ago, at the last moment of the final battle of Heaven Capital, Deity's tone was low and hoarse, with a hint of coldness. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. I've talked to Saint before. At that time, Saint and Daybreak talked about the master of Samsara Palace. Daybreak once said that after the battle with Gu Xingyun, even though the master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured, she still had the power to fight. God looked up into Dawn's eyes. "Do you know what the saint said?" Dawn's body trembled. At that time, the saint's unintentional answer might seem extremely cruel today. Deity laughed. At that time, Saint told Daybreak that the attack from the master of Samsara Palace had been used. Pa! He abruptly raised his hand and threw the teacup on the ground. With a crisp sound, God's body and the clear sound, Deity's body stood up. With the boundless shadow of death, he asked, where did she use it? Dawn's eyes suddenly became extremely sharp. Was it the master of Samsara Palace who killed Huawu? Deity stood in silence for a while, then slowly said, Li, she won't attack Huawu. It's not necessary. He said quietly, the master of Samsara Palace is the only candidate. But what I'm not sure now is which master of Samsara Palace killed Huawu. Dawn looked at Deity. After a while, he blinked and struggled to say, what do you mean? Which master of Samsara Palace? He rubbed his forehead. Your Highness, do you mean that there is more than one master of Samsara Palace in Samsara Palace? What is the master of Samsara Palace? Deity's tone was indifferent. The identity is fake, or in Samsara Palace, the identity is meaningless. There may be more than one identity of the master of Samsara Palace, but there must be only one true supreme will. He was silent for a while and continued, some time ago, I received a message from Wang Tianzong. The message was very simple. He said that he found a woman named Qin Weiyun in the Qin clan. A few years ago, she was in danger when she was traveling in Europe. She was saved by the high-level officials of Samsara Palace and was recognized as his sworn sister. Dawn was a little confused. He suddenly felt that the story was a little familiar. Do you still remember the origin of Qin Weibai? Qin Weibai was in danger in Europe. She was saved by the master of Samsara Palace and was recognized as his sworn sister. Deity's tone was a little cold. If this is a story, then in this story, Qin Weiyun is said to be Qin Weibai. If Qin Weiyun really exists, then where is Qin Weibai in this story? Dawn was confused. He couldn't figure out the relationship for a while, but the general trend at present was extremely clear. He hesitated and said softly, Your Highness, at least we are still cooperating with Samsara Palace. Cooperation? Deity laughed. There is no cooperation. He said, I wasn't sure until not long ago that Qin Weibai involved me in the chaos and didn't intend to cooperate with me. Then what does she want to do? Dawn asked subconsciously. She wants to destroy this era. Deity's tone was cold. In our era, she wants to kill me, Wang Tianzong, and all the experts of the invincible realm. This, Dawn was tongue-tied. In fact, I don't care about face or not, but now, it's too late. Even if I know what Samsara Palace is thinking, it's too late. I can't leave, Deity said softly. He stretched out his hand and pointed to the city in front of him. This is Mormon's. The whole world is looking for the headquarters of Samsara Palace, but it's as ridiculous as looking for who the master of Samsara Palace is. Identity and headquarters, do they really mean anything to Samsara Palace? At the very least, I can be sure that all the power of the Samsara Palace is in Mormons. He reached out and pointed ahead. In the dark night ahead, there were many shadows of buildings. It was dark and extremely quiet. No one in the city looked around, no one made any sound, and there was no chaos at all. Daybreak stood behind Deity and looked at the quiet city. An indescribable coldness ran up his body and spread all over. The night ahead was getting thicker, and the killing intent was spreading. The darkness rushed over with infinite malice, like a raging tide, and instantly drowned the entire Mormons. Here, Dawn's voice was a little trembling. It looks like nothing has changed here. Deity's tone was calm, but there seemed to be an iceberg in his eyes. Even before I meditated, there were still people coming and going, but this city is different. His voice was low and calm. In the battle of the trial day, I borrowed Li Tianlan's sword energy, and Li Tianlan didn't hold back. His kendo was fully displayed in front of me, so I am now. Before the final battle, I was lucky enough to take a step forward and cross the half-step invincible realm. Before the ecstasy appeared on Dawn's face, Deity's voice had sounded like a nightmare. But guess what I saw in my meditation? He laughed softly, and his voice sounded like he was groaning. My sword chi domain expanded several times after my breakthrough, and it's now able to envelop an area of 10,000 meters. However, within 10,000 meters, in every street and every house, I only see killing intent. No matter men or women, there was only killing intent. The killing intent was all over the city. Only in this way can tribulation successfully break through to the present level with the help of the killing intent of the whole city. He turned to look at Dawn and said in a low voice, to be exact, there are no civilians in Mormons now. All the civilians have withdrawn. In this city, every household, except our own people, the rest are enemies. There may be people from other forces, but most of them should be from the Samsara Palace. Dawn looked out of the window subconsciously. It was as dark as ink outside the window, extremely depressing and cold. A city without civilians. Mormons was the place of the final battle. The whole city was a battlefield. A city without civilians. A city, an empty city full of enemies. It was also destined to be a place of blood and corpses. End of this chapter, bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 583. The vehicle passed through Im. Snow Country's declaration of war and the notice of the Wang family of Beihai had spread to every corner of Eastern Europe. Although they maintained restraint, the incomparably bloody war instantly entered a white-hot state. Eastern Europe had become hell overnight. Bullets were shuttling, shells were exploding, and fighter planes were flying. Countless blood and deaths appeared in every country and every city in Eastern Europe. Great chaos continued to spread, and order collapsed in an instant. The war swept everything. Even in the wilderness, the faint sound of fighting and explosions still echoed. The low-flying fighter planes swept across the sky, and the roar of artillery shells came from afar. The wind and rain stopped, and the air on the wet road was unusually fresh. Qin Weibai sat straight in the back row of the vehicle, replied to an email, and said quietly, Counselor Wei Lozan said that we are even. A few stars appeared in the high deep sky. The master of Samsara Palace looked at the stars in the sky and nodded casually. Put him in the observation area. The master of Samsara Palace paused and continued, A-level. Qin Weibai nodded and entered a complicated URL on the laptop. The web page opened after buffering. An extremely sharp saber occupied the entire screen. This was a saber. It was simple, not gorgeous, not complicated. It had a straight line and a slight arc at the tip of the saber. It was simple and straightforward, but it radiated sharpness in all directions. The saber turned slowly. Qin Weibai temporarily wrote a program and then began to enter the password. There were 3 passwords, and then there were 3 verification. After the verification, an extremely delicate and cumbersome website appeared in front of Qin Weibai. There were a large number of options, and everything about a big force in the dark world was listed in an orderly manner. This was the database of Samsara Palace, and also the hub of all intelligence. Qin Weibai clicked into a window. The window opened, and there was a national flag. She clicked in the flag of Snow Country, then entered Wei Lozan's name, and transferred all the information about him to the observation area. Then she looked at the list in the observation area, and was lost in thought. The so-called observation area was a separate web page. The web page was blank at first, but now it was filled with densely packed names. Behind each name was the nationality of the other party, as well as their current and former identities. Qin Weibai transferred Wei Lozan's information. After thinking about it, she made a note in front of Wei Lozan's name, Core Counselor of Snow Country. Almost everyone understood what the identity of a core member of the Snow Empire meant. This identity was incomparably illustrious and noble. To be more specific, if this identity was placed in Zhongzhou State, it was basically equivalent to the leader of the 6 major groups in Zhongzhou State. The name Wei Lozan represented an important force in Snow Country. Qin Weibai looked at the web page and suddenly said, "The Samsara Palace will be gone. It shouldn't exist. The establishment of the Samsara Palace is my obsession. After this battle, whether I die or not, the obsession should disappear." The master of Samsara Palace said softly. Qin Weibai sighed softly and typed an A in front of Wei Lozhen's remark. Then, she closed the web page. It was hard for her to describe these people in the observation area of the Samsara Palace's data bank. But one thing was certain. Before these people entered the observation area, they could all be regarded as members of the Samsara Palace. The Samsara Palace's definition of its own people was complicated and simple. It had nothing to do with standpoint. Through countless transactions, coercion, inducement, and a series of means, the Samsara Palace had to be sure of only one thing. That was, according to the investment of the Samsara Palace, when the people of the Samsara Palace asked for help, the other party would not refuse. This was one of their own people. As for whether they would continue to cooperate or be even after the other party helped them, it didn't make much sense. The database of the Samsara Palace was extremely strict and meticulous. Everything was based on data. On this complex website, all the transactions and feelings could be listed in numbers. What kind of favors and what kind of things were done were all concluded with one life after another. As a real giant in the north of Snow Country, Wei Lozhen helped the Samsara Palace clear the entire Mormons this time. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. He used a troop of his own. Such a move was enough to repay all the investment of the Samsara Palace. So, he would enter the observation area. In the observation area, everything he did in the future had nothing to do with the Samsara Palace. They might start a new cooperation, or they might become hostile. The Samsara Palace didn't care about the so-called standpoint. What the Samsara Palace cared about was that the other party took action this time. Qin Weibai closed the notebook and sighed. All the preparations before the final battle had been completed, and all the trump cards had been completely revealed. The Samsara Palace had put all its strength into this general trend without hesitation. After this battle, no matter what the result was, the Samsara Palace was destined to cease to exist. She pinched the hard edge of the notebook with her tender white palm, looked at the master of Samsara Palace, and whispered, "Will you die? Do you want me to live, or do you want me to die?" The master of Samsara Palace glanced at Qin Weibai. Her eyes were empty, but there was a hint of playfulness and mockery in her tone. "I don't know." Qin Weibai's eyes were complicated and blank. After a while, she lowered her head and whispered to herself. The master of Samsara Palace reached out and held her hand. She said softly, "Then it's up to fate." The phone rang. Qin Weibai took out her mobile phone and looked at the number. She raised her eyebrows slightly and answered it. "Mr. Lin." Her tone was warm and soft. Lin Fengting was silent for a while on the other end of the phone, as if he wanted to explain something. Finally, he smiled helplessly. "I'm Qin Weibai." Qin Weibai's tone was calm and normal, as if it was a matter of course. Lin Fengting no longer hesitated and said calmly, "Arsis is dead. Tribulation killed him." Qin Weibai was speechless for a while. Although the master of Samsara Palace had expected it, the strange and shocked emotion was still so obvious when she heard the news. Tribulation. He killed Arsis. This dreamlike news even caused her to be unable to come back to her senses. "Angel is dead," Qin Weibai whispered. She didn't pay too much attention to Arsis, but Arisis's death proved Angel's fate from another perspective. She glanced at the master of Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace, who had obviously heard the news, didn't say anything, but her figure became a little lonely. "We tried," Qin Weibai whispered, but, she shook her head, and her voice became colder and colder. "How did Angel die?" "I'm still looking into the details." Lin Fengting said quietly, tribulation has now broken through the peak of the invincible realm, and he even stands at the same height as Wang Tianzong. His killing intent is very strong. At present, there is still hope for him to continue to break through. It's fake. Qin Weibai was silent for a while, feeling a little regretful. Lin Fengting also fell silent. After a long time, he said in a complicated tone, "Yes, it's all fake." Qin Weibai didn't know martial arts, but as an expert at the peak of the invincible realm, Lin Fengting could clearly understand this feeling. At this time, the murderous intent over Mormons was soaring. Tribulation's killing intent continued to condense. He broke through the peak of the invincible realm and kept rising. He was getting closer and closer to the real supreme realm. There was still one step left, half a step left, half a step left. There was still a little left. That killing intent continued to condense, and it was almost a sure breakthrough. But it was all fake. Tribulation's breakthrough was too violent. The invincible realm was not stable, and he was seriously injured on the trial day. When he came to Mormons, he had let go of everything and no longer suppressed his injuries, so that his real combat capability directly entered the peak of the invincible realm. After killing Arsis, he surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, but it further increased the burden on his body. From that moment on, all the foundation of his martial arts had begun to collapse. Tribulation's path was over, and it was impossible for him to continue to break through. Such a powerful and peerless martial arts could only be maintained for one night. Lin Fengting suddenly felt a little sad. Tribulation's aptitude was, "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." If everything went well, he should be able to enter the peak of the invincible realm, but it was impossible for him to break through again. Tonight, Angel's death completely stimulated him. With the blessing of the will of the transcendent realm before Angel's death, he went further and completely turned into darkness. In the darkness, he saw the supreme path, but he was also destined to sink in the darkness. Lin Fengting smiled and silently hung up the phone. Qin Weibai held the phone and was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "The Vatican is finished." The master of Samsara Palace nodded. Next, the Wang family of Beihai, the purgatory of heaven capital. Those who should withdraw from the stage of history should all withdraw. The car turned a corner along the mountain road. The starlight was lonely. Before Qin Weibai could speak, a strong light had suddenly hit them. Flaming fire slowed down the car, narrowed her eyes, and looked cold. A deep and majestic voice sounded in the strong light. "I am Virtuous Raymond. Marshal Virtuous Raymond Dreamy, the Ice and Snow Corps has taken over this war zone. Qin Weibai, Flaming Fire, I order you to stop the car and allow you to surrender." The tall and valiant marshal stood at the forefront of the crowd, his eyes burning. Virtuous Raymond. He was one of the 8 marshals of Snow Country, one of the top 10 experts in Eastern Europe, and the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. His code name was Snow Eagle, and he was in charge of the Ice and Snow Corps. In the short time after Snow Country declared war, the army of Snow Country had directly rushed to the vicinity of Immerse, and it was a real elite army. The car slowed down slowly, but did not stop. Virtuous Raymond took a step forward. The violent lightning rose around him, and the air was extremely distorted. Where the lightning crisscrossed, a pseudo-domain had appeared around him. The whole dark world was still uncertain about the life and death of the master of Samsara Palace. But the Ice and Snow Corps had received the information. Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire, the second in command of the Samsara Palace, were in the car in front of them. The Samsara Palace was also one of the targets of the war declared by Snow Country. Capturing Qin Weibai and Flaming Fire was an absolute great achievement. Moreover, capturing the beautiful goddess Qin alive was undoubtedly an even greater hidden achievement. The car was getting closer and closer. Virtuous Raymond narrowed his eyes, and his aura became more and more dangerous. "I order you to stop." The car stopped. In the back row of the car, Qin Weibai turned on her mobile phone and sent a message to Li Tianlan. The master of Samsara Palace closed her eyes. "Hurry up," she said softly. Flaming Fire nodded. In Virtuous Raymond's sight, the door of the driver's seat of the car opened. Flaming Fire, the super master of the Samsara Palace with a cold but extremely beautiful face, came down. There was a flash of excitement in Virtuous Raymond's eyes. He didn't finish his words. In his sight, Flaming Fire raised her palm. The world began to rise higher and wider. Heaven and earth began to spin, and suddenly became chaotic. The coldness spread. Virtuous Raymond froze for a moment. In his sight, the army behind him had appeared below him, getting farther and farther away from him. He saw a headless corpse, dressed in a marshal's military uniform, still standing there. The huge darkness swallowed over. Was that his own corpse? The sharp and violent sword energy rolled up a storm at the moment when Flaming Fire raised her hand. Heaven and earth pressed down at the same time. It shattered in an instant. Flaming Fire's palm waved down without hesitation. 24 moves of sword shattering of land. The sword intent was like a torrent, crushing everything. Wherever the sword energy passed, there were blood waves rising into the sky. Flaming Fire continued to move forward. The domain began to appear after the sword energy. It was known as the strongest domain in the Dark World and the unique technique of Kunlun City. 10th unique domain. The sword energy and the domain intertwined. Starting from Virtuous Raymond, a top expert of the half-step invincible realm, the high-level members of the Ice and Snow Corps were smashed by the sword energy one after another. Flaming Fire kept moving forward. Her cold and elegant face was suffused with undisguised viciousness, and she said word by word, "All of you scram." End of this chapter, bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 584. The sudden outbreak of the war was beyond everyone's imagination, both in terms of intensity and progress. The exact distance from Reki City to Mormons was 986 kilometers. Along the way, they would pass through 5 countries, Oga, Ross, Im, Longji, and Eisen Federation, and then enter Snow Country. In Li Tianlan's and Wulan State's original plan, the first war they encountered should be in Im. They would encounter the reinforcements of Longji and Eisen Federation, led by the Snow Country Army, who were attacking the base of the Arctic Ocean Command. The real tragic war should be after they went deep into Eisen Federation, which was very close to Snow Country. It was an area under the strong influence of Snow Country and also covered by the polar night. Right now, Li Tianlan could mobilize about 400 people around him. This kind of number was insignificant for any medium-sized war, but a small number of people also greatly sped up the marching speed. 400 people and nearly 50 vehicles rushed out of Reki City. Under the curtain of night, the long motorcade moved forward in a straight line, mighty and mighty. The marching time was planned to be 8 to 12 hours. During this time, they would cross countless battlefields and officially rush into Mormons. Although 400 people were small, they were all elites and could even be said to be super warriors. The Qin clan might be a little weak in the whole world and not a super dark force. However, as one of the 4 most deep-rooted families in Eastern Europe, the Qin clan might not be able to come up with tens of thousands of the most elite troops like Zhongzhou State. But in terms of the scale of hundreds of people, the more than 300 elites of the Qin clan given by Qin Dongqiao were no less inferior to the elites of the Snowdance Corps in terms of quality and fighting desire. In addition, the most mysterious terracotta army of Zhongzhou State had 4 groups, and 3 of them were around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, Lin Yuxian, Li Wangsheng, Dongqing Rushi, they had high-end combat effectiveness, super transformed soldiers who were not afraid of life and death, and elites with peak spirit and morale gathered together. Although the number was small, it represented absolute combat effectiveness. This also meant that they could still play a great role after the rapid march to Mormons. But the march was not smooth from the beginning. The first expected war was greatly advanced. As soon as the mighty motorcade left Wolon State, it encountered the first attack of the Snow Country Army near the border of Oga State. The war was as fierce as fire. Eastern Europe was in motion, and the borders of Oga and Russia were already on fire. Among the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, Wolon State was the core. To the east, Oga State and Ross State were the natural gateways to Wolon State. To the west, the other 2 countries could resist Western Europe. Now, the strongest forces in Eastern Europe were gathering in Wolon State. Snow Country was determined to get Wolon State. The Airborne Corps of Snow Country, which was constantly advancing in the territory of Oga State, launched an attack as soon as they saw the convoy. Nearly 8,000 people rushed over like a tide. 0:06 a.m. The Snow Empire's 5th Elite Airborne Division was scattered within the borders of Oga State, with countless casualties. The Brigadier General of the 5th Airborne Division was blasted into pieces by Yi's arrow. The battle lasted less than an hour. But according to the plan, they should have reached Ross by now and were about to approach Im. Li Tianlan, who had not made a move, looked calm. His car was in the middle of the convoy. Looking at the chaotic battlefield, he was silent for a moment before he said in a deep voice, "Let's continue." Lin leisurely drove. Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi sat in the back row. The convoy continued to move forward at full speed. The entire Oga State was serving this convoy to ensure that they could enter Ross State as soon as possible. However, when the convoy was about to leave Oga State, someone blocked its way again. A Major General of Oga State and a Colonel of Snow Country stood side by side on the side of the road. There were only 2 of them. No war broke out. After the convoy paused for a while, an elite of the Qin clan in the front car quickly ran over and knocked on Li Tianlan's window. "Your Highness, this is what the people who blocked the way gave you. We have checked it. It's safe." The elite of the Qin clan's voice was calm, and he held a black USB in his hand. "Who are they?" Li Tianlan took the USB and asked. "They claim to be the pawns of the Samsara Palace in Snow Country and come to help you." The warrior of the Qin clan said respectfully. "The pawns of the Samsara Palace help me?" Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. The master of Samsara Palace did not want him to go to Mormons. Qin Weibai did not want him to go to Mormons, either. If these 2 people did not allow him, who else in the entire Samsara Palace could help him? They said that although the master of Samsara Palace did not want you to go to Mormons, the supermasters inside Samsara had a different view. They were only responsible for delivering the things. As for how to do it, it was up to you. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Yes. Li Tianlan lowered his head, squeezed the black USB in his hand, and said calmly, "Which supermaster of the Samsara Palace is it?" "Military Counselor." Li Tianlan was silent for a while, nodded, and did not speak. Dongqing Rushi had taken out a notebook. Li Tianlan inserted the USB into it. The entire notebook screen went black for a moment, and then a series of extremely complicated codes appeared. The codes ran slowly. The convoy continued to move forward after a short pause. An extremely exquisite website appeared on the screen of Li Tianlan's notebook. The rules and regulations that represented the internal structure of the Samsara Palace all appeared in front of Li Tianlan. He tried to move the mouse, but there was no response. If this is military counselor's code, he should have locked his authority at this time, Dongqing Rushi said softly. After all, she was different from Li Tianlan. During the 3 years of further study in the Deep Sea Academy, when Li Tianlan honed his martial arts in the ice and snow, Dongqing Rushi had accumulated her credits little by little and became one of the few people with the highest individual credits in the Deep Sea Academy. Her grades in all subjects were extremely excellent, and her hacking skills were also among the best. Can it be solved? Li Tianlan frowned. It's very difficult. Dongqing Rushi shook her head. The core of this level of code is always changing. Even if it can be solved, it will take a very professional team, and it will take a long time. Li Tianlan pointed expressionlessly at the screen that seemed to have crashed. Then what does this mean? The screen moved with the shake of his finger. The screen switched. In a flash, it seemed that the whole world of Eastern Europe began to become transparent. The screen in front of Li Tianlan began to scroll quickly. Countless code names appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Flying bird, wild fox, snow rabbit, night snow, winter wind. Li Tianlan didn't know who was behind these code names, but behind each code name was the latest news from all corners of Eastern Europe. What appeared in front of Li Tianlan was a real-time chat box. All the chess pieces of the Samsara Palace in Eastern Europe were in action. Countless chess pieces in the dark were exchanging information, discussing, implementing, and taking action. The whole chat box kept scrolling, and the whole web page was full of news, discussions, and suggestions from professionals. There were no jokes or speculations. Behind each message, there was a lot of information to prove its accuracy. An indescribable urgency and depression almost penetrated through the screen, which was so urgent that people could not breathe. This is what military counselor wants to give you. Dongqing Rushi looked at the notebook seriously. There are countless pieces of information about all of Eastern Europe, the situation of various battlefields, and relatively safe roads. These are what we need most at present. Li Tianlan looked at the screen in front of him quietly. His finger suddenly moved and froze a message. At 4 o'clock, Marshal Yi Deli of Snow Country and Jonah teamed up to break through the military base of the Arctic Ocean Command in Immerse. The commander of the Arctic Ocean Command was seriously injured. The Divine Sword Corps and the Polar Legion of Snow Country have controlled Immerse and are about to march into Ross State. His brain was a little confused. Li Tianlan shook his head suddenly. The Arctic Ocean Command's base in Immerse was the traditional headquarters of the Arctic Ocean Command. Although there were not many people there, they were all elites and had sufficient armaments. Even if the two marshals of Snow Country were famous generals, it was impossible for them to occupy Immerse in such a short time. What on earth happened? At this moment, in addition to the Arctic Ocean Command, there were also 5,000 soldiers of the Snowdance Corps from the Beihai Corps in Immerse. There was also Fireman. What were they doing? The Polar Legion and the Divine Sword Corps. They were controlled by Jonah and Yi Deli, two of the 8 marshals of Snow Country, respectively. Needless to say, the level of elites of the two legions. Once they occupied Immerse, the reinforcements from the rear could be said to be endless. With such a sharp force, Ross State could not stop it, Oga State could not stop it, and Wulan State could not stop it either. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe would probably be completely submerged by the army of Snow Country in the shortest time. The messages on the chat box were still rolling. It was already 1:15 in the morning. At 0:53, according to the preliminary statistics of the headquarters, Snow Country has invested more than 300,000 troops in the war in Eastern Europe. It was just a preliminary statistics, and it was the first statistics. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and slowly opened them again. There was a roar in the air. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. It swept past slowly. Under the starlight, the stealth fighter painted with the latest stealth paint whistled past. On the fuselage, which faintly reflected the reconnaissance signal, the badges of the sky and the sea were extremely conspicuous. Wang Xingxiao held the sword box in his hand, his face serious and solemn. Liaodong, Zhongzhou State. The Black Dragon Camp. There was a hubbub of voices, and the killing intent soared to the sky. The fighter flying past at low altitude went straight forward. In the very center of the Black Dragon Army camp, a thin figure with monstrous killing intent jumped directly from the fighter at the moment when it passed by. He landed on the flat ground in the very center of the camp. He was dressed in a marshal's uniform, and there was only killing intent in his calm and awe-inspiring eyes. In an instant, all the soldiers of the Black Dragon army knelt on one knee at the same time. It was not a salute. Instead, it was on one knee. The roar that shook the sky almost resounded through the whole world with the wind. The Black Dragon army pays respect to the marshal. The roar was like a tsunami. In the roar that was as vast as the sea, Dongqing Wudi, dressed in a marshal's uniform, pulled out his long sword and pointed to the territory of snow country ahead. There was no oath speech. It was simple and justified. In the past 20 years in Zhongzhou State, wherever Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre, pointed his long sword, the border control corps followed, without exception. Black Dragon Army. Dongqing Wudi's voice rolled across the sky, and his killing intent was extremely heavy. Advance. Li Tianlan's eyes slowly opened. His eyes were extremely calm, but there was an extremely demonic blood color burning in the depths of his eyes. Yuxian, overtake. He suddenly said. Lin Yuxian raised his eyebrows. Forward. Li Tianlan's voice was calm. Lin Yuxian laughed. In the galloping motorcade, he honked the horn. The black vehicle roared forward, and the engine roared. The black off-road vehicle overtook the vehicles in front of it one after another, and finally came to the front of the entire motorcade. Lin Yuxian's whole body trembled slightly, and his eyes were already red. Li Tianlan reached out and patted him on the shoulder. This is the most suitable position for us. He whispered, drive faster. The fiercely roaring engine suddenly burst into a harsh sound. Forward. The entire motorcade began to accelerate and accelerate. They left Oga State, entered Ross State, and crossed Im. At 2:50 in the morning on August 24th. The mighty motorcade rushed directly into Im. At 2:56. General Misa of Snow Country was beheaded by Lin Yuxian with a sword. 58. General of the Ninth Heaven once again pulled the string of rainstorm. At 3:00 sharp. Marshal Jonah, one of the 8 marshals of Snow Country, was smashed into flesh and blood all over the sky in Li Tianlan's sword intent. The sword light of the Li family once again lit up on the vast battlefield in Eastern Europe after many years. It was upright. At 3:15, Marshal Li Tianlan of Zhongzhou State killed Merix, a famous general of Snow Country. 25. Yi Deli, one of the 8 marshals, died. 43. The Divine Sword Corps collapsed. 45. Louis, the deputy commander of the Divine Sword Corps, died under Li Tianlan's sword. 52. The sharpness from Zhongzhou State cut into the Polar Ground Army. At 4:00 sharp. Li Tianlan killed 6 generals of the Polar Ground Army in a row. At 4:10. The Polar Ground Alliance collapsed. 15. The motorcade without any repair continued to move forward. 36. The first batch of reinforcements of Snow Country entered Im. Li Tianlan's car was still at the forefront. The engine was roaring. Their blood was boiling. This time, in front of everyone, facing a large number of enemies, Li Tianlan stood on the roof of the car. The cold wind was whistling. The starlight fell on him. It was extremely faint, but it was so dazzling. The sword intent was rising. Countless starlights suddenly turned into sword light all over the sky. Forward. All the way forward. After more than 20 years. After the Li family's highnesses broke through all of Eastern Europe. On the battlefield in Eastern Europe, the sword light of the Li family lit up again, spreading from Reki City to Mormons. It was like a rebirth. It was so dazzling and brilliant. End of this chapter. bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 585. Beihai ushered in the night. Reki City was about to see the dawn. Before the light bloomed, the sky in both places was dark. The electronic signal passed through thousands of rivers and mountains. Across a screen, Summer Solstice was quietly looking at Wang Tianzong in the room. She had a smile on the corner of her mouth, and her calm eyes were almost overflowing with affection and gentleness. Wang Tianzong held the brush motionlessly. He was wearing a black Han costume with gold edges. The robe was wide and had big sleeves. His figure was straight, with an indescribable sense of solemnity under the light. "I've said it before." Summer Solstice said softly, "You look good in ancient clothes." The brush covered with ink fell on the rice paper, but it did not move. The heavy ink spread on the paper. Wang Tianzong stared at the rice paper in front of him, smiled, and whispered, "Yes, you said it more than 20 years ago." Many years ago, when they got married, Wang Tianzong wore the ancient clothes for the first set of wedding photos. At that time, Wang Tianzong, who was still young, was silent and almost dull, while Summer Solstice, who was dressed in golden clothes, was beautiful and peerless. The set of wedding photos that they were most satisfied with was still kept in the album in their bedroom. There were many photos. At that time, Lin Fengting, who had been appointed as the best man of the wedding, was laughing and encouraging the young Song Ci to lift Summer Solstice's skirt. Li Guangtu, another best man, deliberately took the photo crooked. Li Honghe and the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai were discussing the wedding with Summer Solstice's father. It was a grand event. Now in retrospect, the sun was just right on Mount Dibbing that day. Perhaps many beautiful and cruel things started at that time. Summer Solstice's eyes were a little dazed. Time passed quietly for so many years. In the quiet torrent, the quiet and somewhat dull man once again wore the ancient clothes, dignified and solemn, like a real emperor. And herself, "You haven't changed much, but I'm old." Summer Solstice muttered to herself. "How could it be?" Wang Tianzong laughed. "In my eyes, you have never changed." He paused and narrowed his eyes. "It's my body." Xia Zhi blinked her eyes and said with a smile, "I'm in good health, as long as you think I haven't changed." Wang Tianzong turned to look at his wife's face. After a long time, he whispered, "She hasn't changed." The xian paper was already stained with ink. Wang Tianzong's hand holding the pen began to move slowly. His movements were slow, extremely slow, but extremely determined. No matter who planned this chaos in Eastern Europe, at least for me, it's not a bad thing. Over the years, I've always had Mount Dibbing and Beihai in my heart and often neglected you. After this thing is over, I want to show you around. It's a pity to stay in Mount Dibbing for a lifetime in such a big world. Summer Solstice tilted her head and smiled softly. "What about the Wang family of Beihai? How's Shengshao?" Wang Tianzong asked. Summer Solstice's eyes lit up for a moment, and she still looked a little surprised. "If I'm not mistaken, he should be following Li Tianlan's path, but it's not exactly the same. In a sense, he also gave up his current realm and just pursued pure swordsmanship." Summer Solstice said seriously, with a little joy in her eyes. "On the day he came out of seclusion, I was sure I saw the 6 paths of reincarnation in his hand. Of course, it was the weakened 6 paths of reincarnation. The sword energy was very weak, but the sword intent was very close to perfection." Wang Tianzong laughed. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. You want to be weak?" There was undisguised relief in his laughter. With the most perfect sword intent, he would constantly reduce the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. In swordsmanship, sword intent was the most important. Wang Shengshao would become stronger and stronger, but the 6 paths of reincarnation would become weaker and weaker in his hands. When everything went to the extreme, the most powerful 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai would become Wang Xingxiao's starting point in the constant weakening. Going down from this starting point, it was destined to be a new swordsmanship. I've said that. Wang Tianzong was a little proud. Xingxiao will be stronger than me. What a jerk. Summer Solstice rolled her eyes at Wang Tianzong and chuckled. That's good. He has found a new way. I'll leave the Wang family of Beihai to him. I can take you with me. Wang Tianzong said softly, when I go back, we'll set off. It's better to leave the new era to the young. How long will we go? Summer Solstice had some longing. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while. Then he chuckled. Who knows? With enough money, we can go as long as we want. Maybe we won't come back. It's just the obsession of ordinary people. I have a clear conscience all my life. Isn't it the same wherever I am? Many seniors in the Lin clan are like this. He laughed and said in a happy voice, maybe many years later, when you and I disappear in a corner of the world, Xingxiao and Yuetong will find that we left them a little brother or little sister. Summer Solstice blushed slightly and glared at Wang Tianzong. Her eyes were charming and charming. Don't worry. Wang Tianzong said with a smile, at this time tomorrow, everything will be over. I'll go back and take you around the world. Summer Solstice nodded. She wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, she said meekly, it's up to you. What do you want to say? Wang Tianzong glanced at her. Summer Solstice thought for a while and said hesitantly, Xingxiao is following Li Tianlan's path. At present, it seems that the effect is good, but aren't you worried? That's not Li Tianlan's path. Wang Tianzong said softly, Xingxiao just started to give up the current realm of martial arts as Li Tianlan did. His future path is to weaken the 6 paths of reincarnation in the process of constantly improving his sword intent and let this sword become the foundation of his martial arts. Xingxiao is our son. With his character, if he can't see the end of this road, or if he doesn't have a certain degree of confidence, he won't come out this time. Summer Solstice was silent for a while and asked, where do you think the end of Xingxiao's road is? The nib of the pen moved on the rice paper very steadily. Wang Tianzong looked at the nib of the pen and said calmly, in the future. There are too many possibilities. What height he can reach depends on where he positions himself. The ink slowly extended. This time, His Majesty Wang Tianzong's handwriting was still horizontal. He looked at the rice paper in front of him attentively and said, tell me about Snow Country. The chat in the room continued. Outside the square, Wang Tianzong's sword intent had not dissipated, and the condensed image still stood in front of Li Huacheng. Li Huacheng had been silent for a long time. An extremely vast but extremely simple and crude plan was instilled to Li Huacheng by this sword intent. That was the plan of the Wang family of Beihai to take Eastern Europe. A country, a city, a grass, and a tree were all under the sword of Beihai. Li Huacheng was extremely unaccustomed to this style, so he couldn't comment on such a move. He was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, are you sure? Do you think this matter, this chapter is not over? Please turn the page. Is there any possibility of success? Wang Tianzong said, in fact, from the moment Snow Country declared war, my plan had succeeded. But Snow Country is not a fool. Li Huacheng said in a low voice, you can't control the situation with hundreds of thousands or even millions of troops. Snow Country is indeed not a fool, but they are lunatics. Wang Tianzong said blandly, and they are a group of lunatics who lack blood. The so-called fighting genes, the so-called strength, the essence of this nation is just greed. In the face of interests, they will go crazy, but in the face of crisis, they will also be afraid, and, I don't deny what you said. Li Huacheng waved his hand. But can you really bring a crisis to the whole Snow Country by yourself and the Wang family of Beihai? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while. Li Tianlan is in Eastern Europe, he said suddenly. Li Huaqing was stunned. Wang Tianzong's voice had a hint of a smile. I imprisoned the Snowdance Corps. Li Huaqing did not speak. Li Tianlan has no one to use now. Wang Tianzong finally laughed. It was all true. So Li Huaqing still did not speak. The news should have been sent back. In such a situation, I don't believe that Dongqing Wudi can sit still. Wang Tianzong's voice was a little happy. I may not be able to bring a crisis to Snow Country, but I and Dongqing Wudi are enough. Li Huaqing's body shook violently. You want a real war? His voice was full of absurdity. A war with Snow Country? We have no choice. Wang Tianzong said indifferently, in fact, from the beginning, the chaos in Eastern Europe evolved into a war in the end, but you didn't understand it. Li Huaqing sneered. Did the Wang family of Beihai take advantage of the national power of Zhongzhou state to take Eastern Europe? Beihai is also a part of Zhongzhou state. Wang Tianzong said, no one can deny this. Li Huaqing's face was cloudy. The news that Wang Tianzong blocked the Snowdance Corps had naturally reached Dongqing Wudi's ears. He even sent it back in person. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre. Even in the history of the founding of Zhongzhou state for hundreds of years, he could be regarded as a rare famous general and a qualified commander. Dongqing Wudi's strength had not reached the invincible realm. But the whole world knew how terrifying the destructive power of the weapons gathered in his hands was. With Liaodong as the starting point, Dongqing Wudi personally attacked Snow Country, and the Black Dragon Corps was almost unstoppable in Snow Country. If all this was combined with Wang Tianzong's plan, if everything went well, this was the real general trend. And Zhongzhou state would not only take down Wulan state, but even swallow the whole of Eastern Europe in one bite. Li Huaqing, who understood all this in a short time, narrowed his eyes slightly. Tianzong. His tone became calm. We should have a good talk. The figure condensed by sword intent fluctuated slightly. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. What identity do you use to talk to me? His tone was calm, with a faint smile. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes, and his eyes were cold. You can talk to me as the president. You can talk about anything. In the silence, Wang Tianzong's figure gradually faded and eventually disappeared. But if you talk to me as the leader of the academics. He smiled. Then there's no need for that. End of this chapter, bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 586. Li Huaqing didn't know whether it was because of his identity or Wang Tianzong's attitude, but he didn't have a good talk with him in the end. Endless sword qi continued to fall and condense in the sky above the square. The temperature gradually dropped. The entire Snowdance Corps was imprisoned here, and there was no possibility of escape. Li Huaqing stood at the edge of the square, looking at the blurry light at the end of his sight through the blurry sword qi. He was silent for a long time. Wang Tianzong's sword intent had disappeared. The world was silent. After an unknown amount of time, Li Huaqing's body finally moved. He slowly turned around and said to the secretary beside him in a low voice, "Let's go." The black flag stopped beside him. Li Huaqing sat in the back seat of the car, and the car started to move towards the Manlisai Hotel. The flames of war had been burning all over Eastern Europe. The banquet at the Manlisai Hotel was barely carried out under the pressure of Wulan state. No matter what his identity was, it was still the overall situation that Li Huaqing needed to preside over. The light shone on Wang Tianzong's whole body. The video ended. Wang Tianzong lowered his head and did not move. He did not even look in the direction where Li Huaqing had left. He could roughly understand Li Huaqing's thoughts. If everything went well in the chaos in Eastern Europe, the whole of Eastern Europe would fall under the control of the Wang family of Beihai. Because of Dongqing Wudi's restraint on Snow Country, the whole of Zhongzhou state would also be qualified to negotiate with Beihai. Beihai did belong to Zhongzhou state. No one would deny that. But there was a difference between what belonged to Beihai and what belonged to Zhongzhou state. No one could deny this. What Li Huaqing wanted to do was divide the cake. If they really took over Eastern Europe, what could the Wang family of Beihai get and what could Zhongzhou state get? The benefits in Eastern Europe were too great. The Wang family of Beihai could take them, but it couldn't swallow them all. Therefore, Wang Tianzong didn't mind sharing some or even most of the benefits with Zhongzhou state. However, sharing it with Zhongzhou state was not equal to sharing it with the academics or the giant group. Therefore, there were many details on how to divide the cake. If Li Huaqing was standing on the dual identity of the president and the leader of the academics to divide the cake, then there was no need to talk about it. This was Wang Tianzong's attitude, but it would not be his final attitude. Li Huaqing obviously understood this as well. Of the 6 groups in Zhongzhou state, the academics now seemed to be standing at the highest point of power, but when did the fighting inside Zhongzhou state ever stop? Even since Li Huaqing came to power, countless storms in Zhongzhou state had been targeting the academics. With their status, the so-called offending or not offending them was a complete joke. And Wang Tianzong's no talk could even be regarded as a deal to some extent. Li Huaqing would not like his attitude today. And Wang Tianzong did not like the position of the academics in the past. Such a deal, as long as there were enough benefits, was not difficult to do. It was nothing more than a slight change on both sides. Wang Tianzong smiled. In the hundreds of years since the founding of Zhongzhou state, the Wang family of Beihai had ups and downs, but it had never fallen out of the ranks of the top wealthy families in Zhongzhou state. The so-called 6 groups in Zhongzhou state were nothing more than the current ranking. The giant group was loose, the North group was weak, and the special warfare group was similar to but different from the academics. The former had been trying to stabilize its position for many years and purge the Li family's shadow, but its position had been unstable. Although the academics appeared to be full of vitality under the leadership of Li Huaqing, its foundation was poor after all. Wang Tianzong had never looked down on anyone, but for the new upstarts like the Special Warfare Group and the academics, who rose quickly and had a short time and a serious lack of foundation, he somewhat looked down upon them. In the entire Zhongzhou state, the Prince Group of the Southwest and the Southeast Group of the Wang family of Beihai could be said to be deep-rooted and stable as a rock. Only with such a foundation could they come up with countless chips when trading. As for the cake of Eastern Europe, if Wang Tianzong casually cut a piece out, the whole academics would probably rush to it without even putting on airs. This chapter is not over, please turn the page. On. Wang Tianzong thought quietly and became calmer and calmer. The final battle had not yet begun. He was not sure what would happen in the final battle. But if Li Tianlan could survive this time, Wang Tianzong wanted to see what Li Tianlan's expression would be when he faced the academics who had eaten the cake of the Wang family of Beihai. The nib of the pen moved slowly on the snow-white rice paper. Wang Tianzong's movements were getting slower and slower. From chatting with summer solstice to the present, the nib of the pen had only moved a few centimeters on the rice paper. The black ink drew out the word 1 on the paper. The black lines seemed to condense the sharpness of the world, with thunder, heavy rain, and raging fire, strong and cold, hidden. Wang Tianzong's eyes were calm and peaceful, and he was unprecedentedly focused. He held the pen tightly. The slender brush seemed to have the weight of heaven and earth at this time. The tip of the pen continued to move, as if it was going to draw a whole world. Wang Tianzong closed his eyes and recalled his life. His talent was really not too outstanding, not as good as Summer Solstice, not as good as Lin Fengting, and not as good as Li Guangtu. But now he walked in front of everyone. Why? Wang Tianzong did not deny that he had today's achievements because of the pressure, because of the suffocating pressure caused by the glory of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years. But he never admitted the real reason. That was fear. He did not dare to face it. He was afraid that the Wang family of Beihai would fall in his hands. He did not dare to face a down-and-out Wang family of Beihai, its vast territory, tens of millions of subjects, and even the grass and trees on Mount Dibing. Over the past few decades, the great fear was like a wild beast, gnawing at his heart all the time. When he was awake, he would dream of it at night. Every minute and every second, the fear and pressure that was like a tide had completely drowned him decades ago. That kind of completely suffocating fear would make people tremble from the soul. It would make people crazy, make people lose their minds, and make people completely collapse. Wang Tianzong was an expert. But no one could imagine him crying in the midst of great fear. What could he look like? Crying was crying. He cried many times and went crazy many times. But after crying and going crazy, he still had to bear all this in the end. With the calmest attitude, he gritted his teeth and led the Wang family of Beihai forward. He was able to survive in such an environment. So he became today's Sword Emperor. With his today's martial arts, he had completely defeated the ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai. He could even catch up with the ancestors and become the strongest patriarch in the history of the Wang family of Beihai. The tip of the pen trembled slightly on the paper. The confidence in facing anyone began to slowly peel off. Wang Tianzong's eyes were still calm. Today, he was still afraid. At this point in the chaos in Eastern Europe, the Wang family of Beihai had no way to retreat. He wanted a war. The war between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country. The Wang family of Beihai would be the core force of this war. Everything was extremely clear. In such a war, the Wang family of Beihai would either win or die. There would be no second way. Between life and death, it was completely the difference between the sea and the sky and the abyss. Really. There would be no second way. Either win or die. He had to win. Wang Tianzong chuckled. He had to win, and so did the Wang family of Beihai. But this time, the extremely severe situation, the extremely huge pressure, and the extremely strong fear never let him take the last step. In other words, he had already taken the final step. It was silent. But he could clearly feel that his state was not perfect enough. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Wang Tianzong was sure that he had now entered that supreme realm, but he still couldn't figure out where he was lacking. He was now the chosen one of this era. But the state of the chosen one was not perfect. There seemed to be a way ahead. He was only half a step away, or even a toe's distance, and he could reach the end. But the heavy fog enveloped it, and he couldn't see through it or figure it out. The black lines continued to extend on the paper. Countless messages began to replay in his mind. Tribulation killed Arsis, and nearly 3,000 saint warriors were annihilated. Li Tianlan was bathed in blood all the way and was rushing to Mormons. The 30,000 vanguards of the Arctic army rushed directly into Mormons and were besieging the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Tyrant appeared at the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance and began to gather the remnants of the Polar Ground Alliance. All the countries in Eastern Europe had expressed their attitudes. When they finished choosing sides, it also meant that the flames of war in all corners of Eastern Europe began to burn completely. There was a great roar. It was a mess. No one could see the future clearly, and no one could figure out the future. The roar of the fighter plane in the distance penetrated the night. An extremely pure sword intent spread across the sky, extremely pure and full of vitality. The brush tip moved faster and faster on the paper. Wang Tianzong's smile became more and more obvious. He didn't wait any longer. He couldn't wait any longer. Facing the fog in front of him, he finally understood a simple truth. He couldn't figure it out. Then he wouldn't look at it. He couldn't figure it out. Then he wouldn't think about it. Wang Tianzong suddenly clenched the brush in his hand. The brush scratched the rice paper, and the elongated words burst out with infinite sharpness in an instant. The rice paper burned and rushed to the night sky outside. Wang Tianzong's figure left the room. The next second, his figure appeared above the square. Then he disappeared. Up. His figure kept rising in the air. He opened his palm and aimed at the distance. The distant night fell. The extremely pure sword intent with vitality suddenly burst out with a roar. The fighter plane landed. As soon as Wang Shengshao, who was holding the sword box, walked out of the cabin, the precious sword box suddenly exploded. The black greatsword flew into the distant night sky with incomparable excitement. The heavy sword began to spin. The sun, moon, stars, mountains, lakes, and seas carved on the sword seemed to come alive in an instant. The blade of the sword passed through the night and burned under the starlight. One in the south and the other in the north, far apart. A man and a sword rushed toward each other with unwavering determination. Rising. Both were rising. Wang Tianzong was still silent. The pitch-black sword energy of 9 states rose into the sky with joy, cheerfulness, and killing intent. In the highest night sky, the man and the sword met at the highest point. The sword intent that tore the sky apart spread between heaven and earth in an instant, and the whole world seemed to be a little brighter. The first glimmer of the morning sun shone in Reki City. Wang Tianzong held the coldness of 9 states in his hand, but his face was still full of tears. He stood high in the sky and looked down. The lights of Reki City had become dim, and it was a vast expanse. The faint starlight shone all over the world. The clear light shone down, illuminating the mountains. Thousands of miles of mountains and rivers were filled with smoke. Wang Tianzong held the coldness of 9 states and looked in the direction of Mormons. A stream of light flashed in the sky. His figure had disappeared. The wind and rain stopped. Under the lonely starlight, the morning sun was getting brighter and brighter. Eastern Europe was getting more and more chaotic. The whole general trend was going to the end with this sword light. It was coming to an end. There must be an end. End of this chapter, bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 587. No one could tell what had happened at the beginning of the war. The monstrous artillery fire illuminated the whole sky when no one was prepared. The small city closest to the polar region was directly covered by the destructive power. Smoke and fire burned on the ground after the rain, bringing up thick smoke. Blood and wails appeared in every corner. The broken city was trembling and shaking. The dense army rushed over like locusts. Everyone seemed to be stunned. Deity struck with his sword as soon as the war broke out. His sword intent was no longer at its peak because of the trial day. But after taking another step forward from the peak of the invincible realm, his sword energy became more and more powerful. The soaring sword energy almost cleared the army of snow country within 100 meters near the castle in an instant. Blood and corpses were everywhere, and blood flowed like a river. In the castle, the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital took advantage of the short interval to complete the assembly. Then, in less than a minute, the continuous artillery fire almost desperately covered the castle, and the castle was directly flattened in the soaring fire waves. More and more troops poured into Mormons. The troops rushed from every direction of Mormons and converged into torrents, like a great river, surging endlessly. The elite troops that poured into Mormons at the front instantly caused huge casualties to the dark forces gathered in Mormons under the cover of the artillery fire. Several small and medium-sized dark forces, who were instructed by others, followed carefully, or paid a high price to obtain relevant information, knew that the Vatican and the Purgatory of Heaven capital were following Mormons. Before they could figure out what was going on, they had already fallen under the mighty vanguard of soldiers. The flames of war continued to burn. The Arctic army that entered Mormons first was like a fierce tiger. Under the command of Tyrant, a large number of troops that followed the Arctic army were rushing in recklessly. Fighting. Slaughtering. Mormons' calmness and gloom were directly broken at the moment when the artillery fire burned. The real war was exposed in front of everyone. Yes. It was a war. It was different from the conflict in the Dark World. In the Dark World, an invincible realm expert was everything. On the battlefield of war, there were endless artillery fire, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and even more people charging savagely. In the environment of death everywhere, the elite army was everything. In the hundreds of years of history of Snow Kingdom, Mormons had never been as pure as he was today. In this world of ice and snow, everything in this city was either on their side or their enemies. August 24th, morning. When the dawn of Eastern Europe gradually brightened, Mormons, which was still shrouded in the deep polar night, had turned into a Shura purgatory. Among the mountains of corpses and seas of blood, Deity raised his head and looked into the distance. For the time being, the purgatory of Heaven Capital could not find out some details of the outbreak of the war, but it was certain that the reason why the war came so suddenly must have something to do with Tribulation's killing of the Vatican in Mormons. In this hellish scene, the real dark shadow Azura, who had caused all of this, was nowhere to be found. The fleet of carriages moved forward. As the first rays of the morning sun rose, the surrounding sky became dimmer and dimmer. The incomparably deep darkness in front of them was slowly enveloping them, as if it wanted to completely suppress the morning light behind them. The vehicles in the convoy had been changed 3 times. However, in the environment where light and darkness intertwined, the figure standing on the roof of the car at the very front did not change. The thick blood had almost solidified on his clothes. The dark marshal's uniform had turned dark red. Li Tianlan's face was a little pale, but his eyes were as bright as cold stars. The morning wind blew in his face, cold and sharp. Li Tianlan, who was straight, turned around and looked behind him. The fleet of carriages was still mighty. But compared with the beginning, its length had been reduced by more than half. Eastern Europe was in turmoil. That night, on the long road from Reki City to Mormons, the Li family's sharpness blossomed unscrupulously. But under the sharpness, there were not only deaths but also sacrifices. Hundreds of elites. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Now there were less than 200 left. In just a few hours, the less than 500 elites had pierced through 6 large legions of Snow Country with more than half of their casualties. 4 of the 8 marshals of Snow Country had died in Li Tianlan's hands. Countless generals, soldiers, and officers had died. Snow Country's plan to take Reki City had been partially destroyed. After this battle, no matter what, as long as Li Tianlan was still alive, he would be known as the most famous marshal in the world. In time, he might even replace Dongqing Wudi. The engine roared on the road. Li Tianlan looked behind. The light gradually brightened behind, and it was getting darker in front. They were close to the area shrouded by the polar night. They were close to Mormons. In other words, at this time, they were close to the real core battlefield. It was the battlefield where countless dark forces intertwined and several large elite legions of Snow Country gathered. Li Tianlan took a deep breath of the breeze, moved his headphones, and said, "Stop and rest for an hour." He paused and laughed. This is the last rest before the war is over. When he said this, he didn't even know if it was the last rest of his life. Countless battle reports were fed back to the palace of Snow Country in the fastest time. In the palace conference room, the meeting of the heads of Eastern European countries continued. In Eastern Europe, the heads of states who stood at the peak of power were nervously discussing one issue after another. The mobilization of the legions, the direction of attack, and even the military discipline after occupying a certain place and the agreement with the local regime. The atmosphere in the conference room was extremely warm. At least for now, although the war was launched in a hurry and they were somewhat unprepared, it was obvious that those who faced the war were even more unprepared. In just one night, they had already reaped huge benefits, even huge profits. In the extremely warm conference room, the face of the president of Snow Country was a little gloomy. Countless documents and teacups had been smashed in front of him, and it was a mess. On the screens in front of him, all the heads of states ignored this, intentionally or unintentionally. A few hours ago, they saw with their own eyes that the president of Snow Country smashed one teacup after another and tore up a large number of documents. They also received similar battle reports. The 8 marshals of Snow Country. 5 of them died in one night. One of them seemed to have died in the hands of Samsara Palace, but the news that came was also vague about what happened. Some said that it was the master of Samsara Palace, and some said that Flaming Fire, the super master of Samsara, was the master of Samsara Palace. It was a mess. As for the other 4, it was clear that they had died in the hands of Li Tianlan. The lone army of less than 500 people set off from Reki City and marched in a straight line, almost penetrating the entire battlefield. There were 4 marshals, many famous generals, and several legions. Their brilliance had shocked all of Eastern Europe. And the greatest loss was borne by the Snow Empire. Most of the other countries had different losses, but compared with the benefits they had gained, they could still laugh at the moment. But Snow Country had mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops, and so far they had gained nothing. Li Tianlan was approaching the battlefield, and the battle in Mormons was also extremely anxious. The coalition forces of other countries, which were closest to Mormons, were still some distance away. When they arrived there, no one knew what the battle would be like. The president of Snow Country's face was gloomy, and his eyes flashed with madness. He had begun to think about the feasibility of fighting this war with the strength of the whole country. Mr. President. The door was suddenly pushed open from the outside, and a military staff officer rushed in with a frightened face, as if he had seen some disaster. Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State Border Control Corps Black Dragon Army has stepped into our border. In an instant, the whole conference room became extremely quiet. The heads of states completely shut up. The originally warm conference room suddenly became extremely cold. The border between Wulan State and Oga State was a plain and fertile land. The crops were plentiful, and before the light of day had risen. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The local hard-working farmers had already begun to get up and farm. An Oga State farmer, who was no longer young, walked to his own world with his son, casually discussing what to eat at noon. The youngest son was talking happily, but his voice suddenly stopped. He opened his mouth wide. His tender face was full of wonder and envy. He pointed to the distance and said, that, he stammered incoherently, "There's someone there." "Nonsense." His father smiled and shook his head. "Can people still fly in the sky?" It's true. The little boy was so anxious that his face turned red. "Father, look, he's flying in the sky." His father shook his head and turned his head helplessly. His whole body suddenly stiffened. The 3 of them all looked at the sky with dull faces. In the dim night, a small black dot seemed to appear in the distance. The black dot shuttled high in the sky, reaching the extreme in an instant. He was not flying, but walking. Walking in the air. Black clothes with gold rims and wide sleeves. The huge black sword was carried on his back. His figure walked through the sky, coming from a distance in an instant, and then going away in an instant. The 3 of them blinked their eyes. The figure that had stepped through the sky a second ago had already appeared in the distance and was getting farther and farther away. In that direction, there was a mountain. On the other side of the mountain was the boundless Arctic Ocean. The huge cruise ship traveled steadily on the vast ocean. The morning light was getting clearer and clearer. At the forefront of the deck, a young couple was whispering sweet nothings and waiting for the morning sun. The young woman who seemed to have just been together was full of happiness. She opened her hands and let her boyfriend put his arms around her waist from behind. Facing the morning sea breeze, she looked intoxicated. The young man gently sniffed the fragrance of her hair behind her, smiling gently. The deep sea was black before dawn in the early morning. The deep black was constantly fluctuating, with no boundaries, with a heart-palpitating power. The sea was turbulent. The ship was shaking. A gust of wind blew from the far north. The waves suddenly rose. The cruise ship shook a bit and continued moving forward. The young man looked at the sea under his feet, his expression a bit unnatural, smiling. "My dear, maybe today's sunrise is not so beautiful, I think we should go back to the cabin." The woman was a bit hesitant. The man had already pulled her to turn around. The moment she turned around, the woman's figure shook violently. She stood in place, looking away, staring in a certain direction, her face full of disbelief. "There," she pointed to the distance, her voice trembling. "What?" The man was a bit confused. "See for yourself." The woman's voice became sharp. The man turned his head subconsciously. In his sight, the dark surface of the Arctic Ocean was raging, and the wind was raging. In the distance, above the deep sea, someone was stepping on the surface of the sea, moving forward in the storm, calm and gentle. The figure in the distance was getting closer and closer. The black ancient costume inlaid with golden edges was fluttering in the wind. His figure was approaching the cruise ship. The incomparably violent cold wind stopped in an instant. The sea was completely suppressed by a huge and invisible force. Whether it was the mountains, the deep sea, or the plains. Wherever he passed, the world was quiet. As if in awe. The boundless ocean trembled under his feet. He walked on the surface of the sea, neither too fast nor too slow, but his figure disappeared into the distance at an incredible speed. The sky shrouded. Day and night alternated. The morning sun leaped out of the sea, covering the sea with thousands of golden lights. The black figure was still moving forward, his whole body wrapped in the sunlight. The light was boundless. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 588. Liquor, Cold Wind, and Night. The flickering fire was burning on the wet hillside, and the faint light was filled with the fragrance of meat. Jiang Shangyu, dressed in black, was sitting in front of the fire, roasting food in the fire, and looking into the distance in a trance. His eyes were calm and happy, with emotion, as if he had seen a beautiful scenery. The roars and explosions that broke through the sky kept ringing between heaven and earth. The exquisite buildings kept falling down. Bullets with blood shuttled through the city, and the sword energy flew in the sky. Countless thunderbolts and raging fires with killing intent appeared. The city, which used to be exquisite and a little lonely, looked strange and particularly gloomy in all kinds of lights. Death was spreading. The thick smell of blood spread with the humidity of the morning. Corpses were everywhere. Under the still dark sky, the whole of Mormons had become a hell full of blood and corpses. He was staring at hell. Hell was also staring at him. Each was ferocious and happy. Death was still spreading. The densely packed corpses carried fresh blood and the aura of decay that spread from the inside of the city to the outside. The situation had long since gone out of control, and it was even more impossible to see clearly. In the extreme chaos, killing was already the clearest and most effective action. The so-called calculations and schemes had completely lost their effect. In the face of life and death, everything else was pale and meaningless. Jiang Shangyu, who had been missing since the first day he came to Eastern Europe, looked at the chaos in the city, raised his head, and drank a mouthful of liquor. His alcohol tolerance was average, and the liquor was extremely strong. At this time, his face was ruddy, and he was still slightly drunk. The chaos and killing in the city had been going on, and it became the scenery in his eyes. He smiled with a little drunken face, and hummed a song softly. His position was the only high point outside Mormon's. Because the high point was too far away, it could not be used in the war, so it was not occupied by the army of Snow Country. On this mountain peak, which was less than 600 meters above sea level, Jiang Shangyu was drinking wine, roasting meat, and humming a song leisurely, carefree. A tall, thin, and elegant figure passed through the vast night and appeared in front of the fire. He looked at Jiang Shangyu, who was drunk, and frowned slightly. There was a faint anger in his eyes. Long time no see. Jiang Shangyu, whose face was slightly red, smiled and greeted him. He waved his hand and threw the barbecue in his hand to him. Do you want to eat meat? I bought it in the supermarket in Mormon's. It tasted mediocre. Ah, I have wine here, want some? People in East Island drink sake. I'm afraid you can't get used to hard liquor. You went to the city? The man, whose every move seemed to be surrounded by sword energy, took the roasted meat and said in a gloomy tone. 3 days ago. Jiang Shangyu said casually, I bought some food and had a meal in the city. It's cold in Mormon's, so barbecue is very popular. The grilled lamb chops restaurant in the west of the city is pretty good. If it's still around after the war, I'll take you there to try it. You might not be afraid of being poisoned to death, but I am. If you die, how will I explain it to His Majesty? East Island Great Grandmaster Lusheng Tsangxuan, who broke out of Mormons in a fight, sneered and threw the barbecue to Jiang Shangyu. He said angrily, do you know who Mormons is these days? And your identity? That's enough. Jiang Shangyu waved his hand casually. Don't assume anything. The fact is clear. I wasn't poisoned to death, and I didn't expose my identity. In that case, there's no need to say anything more. Do you want wine? Lusheng Tsangxuan narrowed his eyes and said nothing. Every disciple around His Majesty had a high degree of freedom. As the leader of Jifeng Sword Raining School in East Island, Lusheng Tsangxuan was now one of His Majesty's disciples, but his identity was also quite independent. He didn't have to be polite to Jiang Shangyu, His Majesty's student. But after thinking about it, he still didn't do anything. Jiang Shangyu glanced at him and said helplessly, I know one of the guys in the barbecue restaurant. He should have sneaked into the city these days. His name is Max or something. He should be in the top 20 of the killer list and one of the ace killers of Purgatory Angel. I wanted to talk about cooperation with them, but unfortunately, I didn't find a chance. He took a bite of the barbecue, stood up and took 2 steps. He looked at the direction of Mormons and was silent for a long time. Lusheng Tsangxuan, who looked a little relaxed, thought that Jiang Shangyu was going to say something. In his sight, Jiang Shangyu, who was silent, shook his head. Purgatory Angel can barely be regarded as a first-class killer organization. I hope they can survive the war. That Max, I really like his lamb chops. Lusheng Tsangxuan blacked out and said in a cold tone, that's too bad. When I went out of the city, I happened to see Purgatory Angel accidentally colliding with the core team of Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Their leader has been killed by Breaking Dawn on the spot. You probably won't have the luck to eat it in the future. Tut-tut, Jiang Shangyu shook his head and said, killers, in a face-to-face situation, are really ugly and useless. Don't forget, a touch of fear and complexity flashed through Lusheng Tsangxuan's eyes. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The one who killed Arcis and slaughtered nearly 3,000 saint warriors of the Vatican is also a killer. Not long ago, when the killing intent swept over Mormons, it was so unscrupulous. Not only Lusheng Tsangxuan, but even deity chose to be silent. The Pope kept avoiding and even fled. Now, no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Tribulation that night could almost be said to be the strongest assassin and killer in the dark world in the past 100 years, or even hundreds of years. Tribulation, Jiang Shangyu sighed. What kind of killer is Tribulation tonight? He is a heavenly son, or at least a fake one. Tut tut. He shook his head and said, we can't afford to offend him. He took another sip of wine and looked like he was about to fall. How is Mel lad? He's in a coma. Lusheng Zhangxuan frowned and said, his injury is very serious. Tribulation's sword almost completely destroyed him. He is still in a coma until now. I have temporarily settled him down. The purgatory of Heaven Capital will not know his whereabouts, but the place I arranged does not have a very good medical environment. If he is not treated as soon as possible, he may even affect his foundation. Jiang Shangyu raised his eyebrows slightly. Mellad is seriously injured, White Tiger is dead, and the White Tiger group is wiped out. A cold mist gradually appeared in his eyes. We've really suffered heavy losses today. Lusheng Zhangxuan looked at Jiang Shangyu and did not speak. In the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago, Zhongzhou State, Samsara Palace, the Wang family of Beihai, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital all had countless reasons to go all out. As for Jifeng Sword Raining School, Lusheng Zhangxuan also became His Majesty's follower shortly after the final battle more than 3 years ago. At that time, Lusheng Zhangxuan was trapped in Zhongzhou State, but Jiang Shangyu did a lot of things in the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School. He could join His Majesty's team because of Jiang Shangyu's crucial role. Therefore, for more than 3 years, Jiang Shangyu had been in one-way contact with Lusheng Zhangxuan. Although it was only the second time they met today, they were already very familiar with each other. Lusheng Zhangxuan thought that he could clearly see through this young man who was not too complicated. But at this moment, looking at his back, Lusheng Zhangxuan was a little confused. He could feel the coldness in the other party's tone. But even this coldness was so nonchalant. Thousands of meters away, Mormons was fighting. The general trend had been moving. Victory and defeat could appear at any time. He was drinking, eating, and singing here, and he was also careless. So what did he care about? Lusheng Zhangxuan thought silently, but he didn't ask. He walked to Jiang Shangyu, looked at the hell in the distance, and said quietly, "What's His Majesty's order?" "There's nothing special." Jiang Shangyu shook his head. "The teacher's meaning is very simple. I'll watch here and shine the light on you. And you, stay here." Lusheng Zhangxuan waited for the next part. The next part was that Jiang Shangyu glanced at him and asked, "Do you want a drink?" Lusheng Zhangxuan held his breath directly in his heart. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I stay here?" "Of course." Jiang Shangyu said blandly. "What can I do if I stay here?" Lusheng Zhangxuan's voice became more and more annoyed. "Drink and eat. If you like, you can sing. But I don't like your East Island language. You can use Chinese. Do you know the national anthem of Zhongzhou State? How about one?" Jiang Shangyu smiled more casually and calmly. Lusheng Zhangxuan's eyes almost spurted fire. Zhongzhou State and East Island had not been in harmony since the founding of the country. As Zhongzhou State became stronger and stronger, East Island naturally became more and more difficult. Hundreds of years ago, the Wang family of Beihai rose and directly took the largest island from East Island. Until today, it was still a shame for East Island. As a Kendo Grandmaster of East Island, why did he sing the damn national anthem of Zhongzhou State? Ah, forget it. Jiang Shangyu ate the meat and seemed to think of something. Oh, I remember. There's a pretty good club in Dongdu. It's called something. I've been there once. The singers there are very interesting. Something called Wenquizi, something. His tone was cheerful, as if he was really chatting. But Lusheng Zhangxuan's face suddenly turned pale for a moment. He turned his head little by little, stared at Jiang Shangyu, and asked word by word, "How do you know?" Jiang Shangyu's voice stopped abruptly. He looked at Lusheng Zhangxuan and blinked blankly. What? The vigilance in Lusheng Zhangxuan's eyes became clearer. Is this a warning? Jiang Shangyu squinted and knocked on the flagon. I don't know what you're talking about. He handed the barbecue in his hand to Lusheng Zhangxuan. Have a taste? An invisible sword intent fluctuated, and the barbecue in Jiang Shangyu's hand was instantly chopped into countless pieces. Jiang Shangyu uttered an "ah" and shook his head. If your majesty has nothing to say, I'm going back. Lusheng Zhangxuan glanced at him expressionlessly and slowly turned. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Turn around. Jiang Shangyu held the flagon and looked at the burning fire in front of him. He said indifferently, if you leave, Wen Kuizi will die. Lusheng Zhangxuan suddenly turned around. In the darkness, the invisible sword energy suddenly brightened for a moment when it gathered. As the gale passed, the sword light had directly arrived in front of Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu, who seemed to have been prepared, stepped over the fire. He reached out. He punched. The vast but extremely empty power suddenly turned into a vortex in front of him. The sword light and the gale melted in the vortex and disappeared silently. The fire was still trembling. Jiang Shangyu's body shook, and his eyes were drowsy. No, I drank too much. Don't fight. I'm not in a good state today. Lusheng Zhangxuan stood where he was. His eyes had become extremely dignified. The momentum of the fight just now was not great, but it was exquisite to the extreme. Lusheng Zhangxuan's sword in rage was close to the power of the divine list. The Wen Kuizi that Jiang Shangyu mentioned was indeed in a club in Dongdu, but she was not a singer, but the owner of the club. She was an important figure of Jifeng sword reigning school and also Lusheng Zhangxuan's favorite woman. Her reverse scale was touched, and the sword with anger disappeared silently in front of Jiang Shangyu. At that moment, the vast and empty power in the punch showed not the absolute destructive power, but the real exquisite to the extreme. Lusheng Zhangxuan looked at Jiang Shangyu silently. He was silent for a long time, and then he said indifferently, "What do you mean by not letting me go?" "The teacher asked you to stay here." Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, "This is also to protect you. Now that you go to Mormons, you can't come back." "Protect?" Lusheng Zhangxuan sneered and said, "I'm the master of Jifeng sword reigning school. Now my subordinates, the real elites of Jifeng sword reigning school, are fighting with nearly 1,000 people. As the master, do I need protection? They are victims." Jiang Shangyu's voice was calm and cruel. "I told you at the beginning that if you want to get what you want, you must pay the price. The elites of Jifeng sword reigning school and Mormons are part of the price." Lusheng Zhangxuan was stunned. Then he gritted his teeth and said, "Why should I pay this price?" "Because of deity." Jiang Shangyu said, "Only in this way, deity will believe our sincerity. As a follower, you bet nearly half of the strength of Jifeng sword reigning school with him. He has no reason not to believe you." Lusheng Zhangxuan suddenly felt a little cold. "Do you mean that His Majesty did not intend to cooperate with the Purgatory of Heaven capital from the beginning? It's not a matter of cooperation at all. Until now, don't you understand? In this situation, many people may do it for something, but more people stay here because there is no way back. If there is a choice, the Purgatory of Heaven capital may have left. Cooperation, what cooperation? Zhongzhou state is destined to get Eastern Europe, so what's the benefit of our so-called cooperation?" Jiang Shangyu pointed to Mormons in the distance. "This is the end. It's a mess. Let it continue to be messed up." Lusheng Zhangxuan's voice was a little low. "Your Majesty, what does he want? I think His Majesty has expected everything at present and should control everything. The teacher doesn't want anything. Jiang Shangyu looked at Lusheng Zhangxuan and said, "To correct you, all this has been expected, but no one can control everything. There is no such saying in the dark world. At least I haven't heard of it. Control everything? Bullshit. The dark world can only sweep everything. Where is the control? Who can really control it? The teacher can predict this, but he never wants to control it. Even the Samsara Palace, the master of Samsara Palace, and Qin Weibai, who planned everything from the beginning, don't want to control anything. From this point of view, our goal is the same. Eastern Europe? We don't want it. Benefits? We don't want it either. What we want is the present, which is chaos." Jiang Shangyu's eyes were a little dazed. She is really a genius woman. She forced the whole dark world to the point of no retreat, and then set off chaos. Then, there is no need for then. Since there is no retreat, the chaos can only continue. As for what happens next, what does it have to do with her? What does it have to do with me? Lusheng Zhangxuan frowned and said with a headache, "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Jiang Shangyu shook his head. "It's very simple. No one can see the current situation clearly, and there is no need to see anything clearly. Because both we and the Samsara Palace have got what we want. The general trend is chaotic, so let it be chaotic." He paused and whispered, "In any case, it will end. The only thing I can do now is to keep you here to protect you, and then wait for the end of the war." He drank up the wine in his hand, closed his eyes in a trance, and lay on the grass. The cold wind in the morning blew over, carrying his sigh, and constantly drifted away. It's a clear sky. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 589. It was the third hour of the war. There was almost no intact place in the whole of Mormons. Flesh and corpses were scattered all over the city. The battle did not stop, but became more and more intense. Perhaps there was more than one choice before the war began. But when the wind and rain stopped and the soldiers of Snow Country swept through all of Eastern Europe, no one could escape unscathed in the chaos. Snow Country was attacking Mormons with all its strength. This was the territory of Snow Country. Under the circumstances of occupying reason, Snow Country's actions were extremely violent and crazy. In the first 3 hours, the first army to enter Mormons was almost completely annihilated, and the most elite Arctic army also suffered heavy losses. However, the huge losses also brought unimaginable damage to the various dark forces lurking in Mormons. This was a real extermination. Killer organizations, mercenary groups, and free unions. The whole dark world was withering. One after another, the forces that could dominate in the dark world were drowned by endless soldiers. A large number of soldiers fell here, and then more and more troops came in. Without any hesitation, under the absolutely tough orders, all the troops were attacking with no regard for their lives. The third hour. When the 3 large integrated legions of Snow Country led the coalition forces of 3 other countries to attack, most of the dark forces gathered in Mormons had almost completely disappeared on the battlefield. From the beginning of the war to the present, Daybreak did not know how many people he had killed, and he could not describe his inner feelings. The dark forces, familiar or hostile, fell under the torrent of soldiers of Snow Country one by one. Bullets, artillery fire, explosions, all kinds of weapons, carpet airstrikes. In the shortest time, Snow Country used almost all the means in the conventional war. This was extermination. In the chaotic general trend, Snow Country and even the whole of Eastern Europe had completely regarded Mormons as a battlefield of extermination. They were exterminating the whole dark world. There were fewer and fewer elites in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. In the high-intensity intensive battle, the gap between the so-called masters and elites had been infinitely narrowed. In the crowd tactics, not to mention the fire-flaming realm, even the masters of the invincible realm would be tired. But the soldiers of Snow Country seemed to be endless. Daybreak, who had been with Deity all the time, tried to analyze the various situations on the battlefield. Dawn was standing at the forefront of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Blood and flesh were flying everywhere. In the rare rest time, Daybreak summarized the news one after another until he received the most important and sensitive piece of information. It was an old man in the purgatory of Heaven Capital who delivered the information. He had been in the purgatory of Heaven Capital for nearly 15 years. Including the time in the Lee family, it had been more than 20 years. This was an absolutely trustworthy companion. Therefore, Daybreak didn't suspect anything when he saw the news he sent. He hesitated and then asked uncertainly, "What's wrong with the Jifeng Sword Raining School?" "Total annihilation." The old man from the Lee family gritted his teeth. He was an expert of the thunder-shocking realm and was in charge of an area in the war, which happened to be close to the battle zone of the Jifeng Sword Raining School. 10 minutes ago, he saw with his own eyes that countless soldiers completely extinguished all the power of the Jifeng Sword Raining School in the extremely violent and domineering Sword Light. It happened almost in an instant, but it could be said to be the most tragic moment since the war started. 2 guest elders, 4 protectors, and hundreds of core elites, the old man's face was ashen. Completely annihilated. Daybreak's heart sank slightly, and he asked subconsciously, "Where is Lusheng Zhangquan?" "I don't know." The old man glanced at Daybreak. "It is said that he left the city not long ago." Daybreak's face changed, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In front of him, Deity's figure had stopped. He turned around, looked at Daybreak, and then looked at the old man from the Lee family who delivered the information. "Lusheng Zhangquan left the city?" "The news has not been completely confirmed," the old man from the Lee family said cautiously. Deity laughed. In the chaos, his smile was extremely clear. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. What else can be confirmed?" What Lusheng Zhangquan brought was nearly half of the power of the Jifeng Sword Raining School. Now this power was completely annihilated, but he didn't appear at all. Even he is not within my perception range now. It can be confirmed. He shook his head. No need to confirm. The old man from the Lee family silently retreated. Daybreak wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, he couldn't help but say, "Your Highness, the Jifeng Sword Raining School, Lusheng Zhangquan betrayed us." Deity's tone was calm. "He betrayed our cooperation." "Oh, cooperation." They never intended to cooperate from the beginning. The so-called His Majesty was willing to use half of the Jifeng Sword Raining School as a bargaining chip. Deity said quietly. His eyes scanned the battlefield in front of him. There was fighting everywhere, and people were dying everywhere. In the extreme chaos, countless people had completely lost their minds. Deity fell silent. At this point in the war, it had long been beyond everyone's control. But such a war was meaningless for the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He cooperated with His Majesty. What he got was betrayal. He cooperated with the Samsara Palace. What he got was betrayal. Now the purgatory of Heaven Capital was in Eastern Europe. What else could they get? He clenched his fists gently. Some decisions should have been made a long time ago, but the intelligence of the purgatory of Heaven Capital was a step slower. Deity didn't know if it was too late to make a decision now, but it was better than wasting time here. Deity took a step forward. A domain condensed by pure sword intent instantly surrounded all the core personnel of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The sword light spread wildly with the domain as the center. The soaring blood waves continued to spread out at an almost crazy speed. Countless soldiers of Snow Country were directly torn apart the moment they touched the sword light. The sword light was like a tide, endless. The soldiers of Snow Country fell down one by one. Deity stood at the forefront of the purgatory of heaven capital. His voice was calm, and there was not even much unwillingness in it, only determination. "We," he said quietly, "break out of the encirclement." After a pause, he emphasized, "Go back to East Island." His voice was light and heavy, with indescribable weight. All the people of the purgatory of heaven capital knew that from this moment on, in the face of the uncontrollable chaos, the purgatory of heaven capital had admitted its failure. Because His Highness had completely given up Eastern Europe. They just didn't know if it was too late. The entire purgatory of heaven capital began to shrink the formation as soon as it received the order. The huge formation centered on Deity. The sword intent, which was close to the supreme realm, scattered layer by layer. The purgatory of heaven capital began to move forward and break out of the encirclement. Kill. At the end of the line of sight, separated by countless troops of snow country, a roar that shook the whole city suddenly sounded, neat and uniform. The crazy roar roared through the whole city. In an instant, it seemed that heaven and earth were shaking. In the distance, many figures were rushing, charging, and gathering forward. There were more and more people, more and more orderly, and the speed of moving forward was getting faster and faster. All the soldiers of snow country in front of them, whether they were elite or ordinary, were penetrated, torn, and scattered like paper. Invincible. Invincible. The killing intent that was condensed to the extreme moved forward wildly, and any obstacle in front of them was smashed in the first place. Countless people were roaring. Deity was still calm. But daybreak and dawn's hearts sank slightly. The momentum of the flood ahead was just that ferocious, and from their louder, crazier, and even desperate roars, everyone knew where they came from. In front of them, there were enemies. More powerful enemies were shouting at the top of their lungs. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The roar was exhausted. There was only one sentence. Beihai Corps, charge. 5 minutes. On the long street filled with people fighting, it took the gathered Beihai Corps less than 5 minutes to tear the defense line of Snow Country's army and rush directly to the purgatory of heaven capital. There was no hesitation, no retreat. In the face of Deity's sword energy that surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, the Beihai Corps directly rushed up. Tens of thousands of people were rushing like wild thunder. The dazzling blue lightning gathered at the front of the Beihai Corps. The thunder-shocking realm experts of the Beihai Corps charged together one after another. The sword light flew over. The lightning went out. The thunder-shocking realm expert at the front turned into a bloody mist. Then the second one. Then the third one. But no one stopped. The whole Beihai Corps rushed over like crazy. Thunder shocking, fire flaming, ice condensing. Groups of people rushed to Deity's sword energy without hesitation. The bloody mist was flying. The army was charging. Deity did not retreat. His sword energy domain was surrounded by the corpses of the Beihai Corps. The soldiers of the Beihai Corps were still rushing up. They were still rushing up. Rush, rush, rush. Death and blood were flying cheaply. Deity did not retreat. But on this battlefield, only the Beihai Corps could really move forward. Tens of thousands of soldiers of the Beihai Corps were clearly telling the purgatory of heaven capital a fact with their lives. You. Every one of you. No one could leave. Amidst the intense battle, countless attacks seemed to appear from all directions in an instant. In daybreak sight, someone's body began to burn. The moment the fire ignited, it scorched his skin, but what was exposed under the skin were countless alloy steel plates that were condensed with flesh and blood. The fire burned the monster-like body. The monster roared, crossed the blood, and rushed straight into the phalanx of the Beihai Corps. The flames kept flying. In the cold Mormons, the temperature on the streets began to rise sharply. Countless elites of the Beihai Corps who came into contact with the flames were completely evaporated. More and more attacks came from different directions. Some people rushed out of the ruins, some people began to appear in the darkness, some people took off the military uniforms of Snow Country, and some people got up from the ground. Countless attacks completely covered the Beihai Corps. Deity was still calm. There was no joy on Daybreak and Dawn's faces. They all knew who these people were. This was the Samsara Palace. Before the final battle, the Samsara Palace had quietly lurked in every corner of Mormons. Although the Samsara Palace did not attack the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But on the side of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, someone had already gone directly to meet them. That was not a battle. It was, they left the team. They rushed into the phalanx of the Beihai Corps and finally integrated with the people of the Samsara Palace. It was so perfect. More and more people came out of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Daybreak saw Tianyin from inside. He also saw many brothers with whom he could entrust life and death. On the most critical battlefield, these old people who belonged to the Li family left the camp of the Purgatory of Heaven capital one by one and went to the sequence of the Samsara Palace. They were so resolute. In the incomparably violent sword energy domain, Deity took a step forward with the entire domain. His lips moved slightly. Those sword energy quietly bypassed all the elites of the Li family who left the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Daybreak, who was closest to him, frowned and took a step forward. This time, he finally heard Deity's voice clearly. It was extremely stubborn. This is my Li family. End of this chapter, bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 590. When the motorcade was about to leave Longji State, the surroundings had become completely quiet. Although the number of people was reduced by more than half, the mighty motorcade still resolutely passed through the border of Longji State. The team, which had been completely bloodshot along the way, had long been unscrupulous. Under Li Tianlan's clear order, no one thought about how to hide. From Reki City to Mormons, it was a straight line. Such a crazy action was for nothing more than two things. One was to be close. The other was to be fast. In order to achieve this goal, the mighty motorcade even directly passed through several border cities of Longji State along the way. The cars covered with blood and single holes passed through the city that had become cold. Until they were about to leave the country, they did not encounter any interceptions. So not only Li Tianlan, but also everyone knew that the core theater of operations in Eastern Europe had begun to shrink, and the troops mobilized by Snow Country seemed to have reached the limit. The entire Snow Country had transferred more powerful forces to places where they were needed more. Dawn had been left behind by them. Before everyone had time to see the sunrise, the motorcade had officially entered the polar night. The long darkness shrouded them. There were lights everywhere in the city. Li Tianlan left the roof of the car and changed into a military uniform in the car. Dongqing Rushi carefully put on the military rank for him and then poured him a cup of coffee from the thermos in the car. His spirit was still tense. But after getting a rest environment, his body began to relax subconsciously. Li Tianlan took a sip of coffee and took a deep breath. Great fatigue came over him. He had stood in the cold wind on the roof of the car for nearly 10 hours. His numb body began to itch in the warm car, and the cold feeling became clearer. He moved his body, drank up the coffee, and said in a low voice, "Something must have happened in Mormons. There is no need to be sure. Things have never stopped in Mormons. But at present, the current situation is indeed a little unusual." Lin Yuxian drove the car and answered casually. Dongqing Rushi took out a cigarette and lit it for Li Tianlan. Her clear voice was a little hoarse. "The situation is not good for Snow Country." Li Tianlan bit the cigarette but hard and felt the taste of tobacco. He shook his head and said, "It's hard to say now, but Snow Country must have sacrificed a lot. In the chaotic battlefield, before the convoy arrived at Longji, it had lost all contact with the rear, which also meant that Li Tianlan and the others were really alone. 2 hours ago, the network center of the Samsara Palace was cut off, and the code given to him by military counselor was completely rewritten. Li Tianlan had now lost all sources of intelligence, but the moment before the network center of the Samsara Palace was cut off, Li Tianlan still got the news from the Samsara Palace. As of 3 hours ago, Snow Country had already invested more than 500,000 soldiers in this battle. The order had almost been transmitted to every corner of the Snow Empire. In the ears of every army, there was only one order. Battle. Only battle. More than 500,000 troops, this was almost half of the army of Snow Country. At present, apart from the few elite troops stationed at the border of Zhongzhou state that had not appeared, all the other troops of Snow Country were on the move. Li Tianlan couldn't imagine what 500,000 people meant. But if these 500,000 people really intended to fight to the death, the flames of war would be enough to burn the entire continent. Eastern Europe. But now they were about to enter the Eisen Federation. The Eisen Federation was extremely small. From the map, the Eisen Federation, which was only a few thousand square kilometers, was like a small reptile between Longji and Snow Country. The convoy sprinted vertically, and it would take them no more than 2 hours to cross the Eisen Federation. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. Then it was Mengsea, the big city at the northern end of Snow Country. After passing Mengsea, they went all the way north. Mormons was 200 miles away. This was already the most central area. If Snow Country wanted to take down or even destroy all the dark forces in Mormons, they would inevitably set up defenses here and even deploy a large number of troops. But now, this place was cold and cheerless. In fact, it could even be said to be empty. The only explanation for such an unreasonable phenomenon was that Snow Country had been extremely strained and had even transferred all the available troops, including the defensive troops here, to Mormons. 500,000 troops, Li Tianlan muttered to himself. The situation in Eastern Europe today was chaotic and clear. The whole of Eastern Europe was a battlefield, but there were not many cores of the battlefield. Mormons was naturally the core. The other core was the road from Snow Country to Reki City. Although there were battles in other directions, they were not the focus after all, nor were they the focus of the hundreds of thousands of troops of Snow Country. Li Tianlan had defeated 6 legions in a row along the way. Most of the legions of Snow Country had about 20,000 people. The elite legions were slightly smaller, and the reinforced legions were slightly larger. All in all, Li Tianlan met no more than 100,000 troops of Snow Country tonight. Many of them were killed by Li Tianlan in the vast battlefield, and then hundreds of people risked their lives to break through. Now, hundreds of thousands of troops had surrounded Mormons, and they did not even have a way to break through. How tragic would Mormons be? He opened the window, threw away the cigarette butt, and said calmly, "Faster. If I were you, I suggest you take a break from now on. In 4 hours at most, we will officially enter the battlefield." Lin Yuxian laughed. "I can drive." Dongqing Rushi said softly. She looked at Lin Yuxian and asked, "Do you want to rest?" Lin Yuxian shook his head with a relaxed look. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Rushi, wanting to say something but stopping on second thought. "Do you want me to get out of the car? Just put me in any position in front of you." Feeling his gaze, Dongqing Rushi turned her head. Her eyes were clear and soft, and her voice was clear and pleasant. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly. In fact, there was such a dispute before they set off, and it was not even a dispute. Mormons had become a purgatory. It was a real battlefield, or even a desperate situation. As a man, Li Tianlan naturally did not want Dongqing Rushi to take risks. Dongqing Rushi's attitude at that time was the same as now. She had to go. But she could not go with Li Tianlan. The meaning could not be clearer. You can leave me in any corner without me. I will go to Mormon's. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little complicated. He touched Dongqing Rushi's hair, held her in his arms, and whispered, "Take a break." Dongqing Rushi leaned over obediently, rubbed her face against Li Tianlan's chest, and whispered, "Am I very willful?" "No." Li Tianlan patted her head. "Go to sleep. I am your woman, and I have the ability to protect myself. When you are going to risk your life, how can I be willing to stay behind? I am all yours. If you risk your life in the front, I will be more sad in the back." "I know I am willful, but," Dongqing Rushi muttered to herself. Her beautiful big eyes gradually became blank and full of fatigue. "I will protect you." She closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Lin Yuxian sighed softly. He was silent. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. After a while, he suddenly said, "She is right." "What?" Li Tianlan asked casually. "If she is really worried about you, she will feel more uncomfortable if she stays behind. That is the real feeling that every second is like a year. It is better to risk your life with you. At least, no matter life or death, you are together." Lin Yuxian laughed. Li Tianlan was in a daze. After a long time, he carefully hugged Dongqing Rushi's body and whispered, "Yes, at least we are together." Lin Yuxian stopped talking. There were a lot of feelings and emotions that he had known before, but he had never experienced them himself. But tonight, in the endless war, he saw Li Tianlan standing on the roof of the car. At that time, Dongqing Rushi was sitting in the back row. He was driving. During that time, which was neither short nor long, looking at Dongqing Rushi's performance, Lin Yuxian really realized what it was to worry and what it was to be restless. He gently stepped on the accelerator. The motorcade began to speed up. Li Tianlan was not sleepy. He held Dongqing Rushi in his arms and looked out of the window at the darkness that seemed to last forever. Under the starlight, he let go of all his mind. At this moment, there was no war or general trend in his heart. He thought of Dongqing Rushi, Qin Weibai, and even Wang Yuetong. His eyes flashed, which was a kind of cherishing light. Crazy roars and roars penetrated the heavy fog. In the corner of Mormon's, the manor facing the glacier and polar region became the only pure land in the whole Mormon's. The white mist representing a large area of vitality had been rolling for several hours. A vast mist completely enveloped the entire manor. There were not many people stationed in the manor, less than 1,000. They were all trusted elites of the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace. Because they had been prepared for such a situation, everyone was equipped with specific equipment, especially some kind of extremely expensive goggles, which was enough for them to see something vaguely in the thick and strange white mist. The war was going on in every corner. No one knew how many soldiers of Snow Country had inadvertently rushed into the white mist. Not only Snow Country, but also various dark forces, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, and the Beihai Corps rushed into the white mist, and then they were killed by the elites of the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace. The mist spread in the direction of the polar region, and the entire manor seemed to have completely disappeared in Mormon's. In the thick white mist, Lin Fengting saw the master of Samsara Palace, who had rushed all the way from Reki City. There were battlefields everywhere outside the manor. The master of Samsara Palace, Flaming Fire, and Qin Weibai fell from the sky and stood in front of Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting, who looked a little annoyed, had a gloomy look in his eyes. When he saw the master of Samsara Palace, he showed a bitter smile without concealing it. "I have news," he said slowly. "You should already know that Tianlan set off directly from Reki City with less than 500 people and defeated 6 legions of Snow Country along the way. Now he should be about to arrive at the Eisen Federation. My boy is also in there to join in the fun. Most of the people are supported by Qin Dongchao. Did you quarrel again? The master of Samsara Palace asked. Lin Fengting snorted coldly and did not speak. It doesn't matter. The master of Samsara Palace moved forward slowly. I'll rest for a while. There is still some time before they arrive at Mormon's. We can stop them then. Her voice was calm, indifferent, and casual. But Qin Weibai, who was behind the master of Samsara Palace, trembled slightly. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.